entire Flinch horror anthology from Vertigo Comics. Eyes wide open, welcome to a world of horror, sin, and psychedelia. A horrific nightmarish highway paved with monsters, killers, cannibals, necrophiles, crime, zombies, sex, drugs, cigarettes, and the inescapable grip of fate. Flinch is an unfiltered dive into the macabre, a series where the darkest corners of the human psyche are laid bare, brought to life by some of the most famous writers and artists in the industry. From its inception, this book teetered on the edge of cancellation, its existence constantly threatened. Yet, like all true horrors, it refused to die. It lingered, thrived, and festered in the minds of those who dared to read it. So cut off your eyelids and prepare for the ride down this highway to hell. It is drenched in shadows and blood, and there's no turning back. Don't flinch, but before we begin, we have a small request. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channel. It is a small click from you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you. Flinch Part 1, Rocket Man by Richard Burning and Jim Lee. A burly man dressed in a grease-stained tank top and suspenders worked meticulously in his garage, tightening screws and making adjustments to a machine. His knuckles tensed as he gripped his tools, his face lined with determination. Under his breath, he whispered a quiet prayer, hoping that this time his work would finally pay off. As the sun dipped lower behind him, he gathered a large bag and a mechanical device, heading toward his house. He reassured himself that this would be the moment of success. He could feel it. After years of sitting in a toll booth, inhaling fumes, and despising every second of it, everything was about to change. His wife, Fran, stood in the doorway with their 2 children beside her, watching him with a mix of anticipation and concern. He told them that this was the night they had all been waiting for. His daughter, Cassie, looked up at him hopefully, asking if he really meant it. Kneeling near his homemade contraption, he beamed with confidence, telling her that all the long nights and weekends spent in the garage was finally going to pay off. The suit was complete and ready. Fran, her expression weary, had endured years of this obsession. He acknowledged her patience, reminding her that she had supported him even before their children were born. Turning to his son, Bill, he promised that he would make up for all the missed games and time lost. Cassie's excitement grew, calling him the best. Overwhelmed by their support, he thanked them, saying they had all helped keep him going. Tonight, he would repay them for their patience and belief in him. Cassie giggled, imagining his future fame, asking if he was going to be famous. He laughed, telling her they would be even better than famous. They would be rich. Lifting her up, he encouraged her dream, telling her the sky was the limit. Later, as he finalized his preparations, Cassie eagerly offered to help him get ready, and he gladly accepted. Alone for a brief moment, he reflected on all his past failures, all the miscalculations and setbacks that had led to this night. Each one had been a lesson, showing him what he needed to do. Clenching his fist, he told himself that now, finally, it was time. Suited up, he made his bold declaration. Tonight, he would fly. Cassie cheered, bouncing with excitement. Fran, cautious as ever, suggested they all take a step back. With a determined nod, he activated the suit, flipping the necessary switches. This was it. A spark, a sudden surge. An explosion engulfed him, flames consuming his figure in a blinding burst of fire. When the smoke cleared, he was soaring into the sky. Pure exhilaration took over as he realized that it was happening. He had done it. He was flying. Then confusion struck. He called out for his family, expecting to hear them cheering below, but there was no response. Below, the neighborhood lay in devastation. Police officers arrived to assess the wreckage. One asked what had happened, and his colleague explained that the man had been obsessed with building a rocket suit. That night, he had finally tested it. The aftermath was grim. The wife had suffered third-degree burns. The boy had severe injuries, including a crushed chest. The little girl, she wouldn't make it through the night. And the man himself? One of the officers gestured toward the smouldering remains, saying that what was left of him was scattered all over the place. They would be scraping him off the garage for a week. Yet, far above, his lifeless body drifted in the clouds, suspended in the remains of his dream. One officer questioned what had been going through his head. His partner simply shrugged, remarking that some men always had their heads in the clouds. Nice Neighborhood by Jen Van Meter and Frank Quitely. A young man crouched near a dumpster, offering a bandage to a girl with a bleeding leg. She asked if he needed it more, but he dismissed her concern, saying he had gotten better at handling wounds himself. As they moved through the snowy alley, she mentioned hearing the gunshot and asked if he could still walk. He reassured her and helped her up. He recalled how the neighborhood had once been peaceful, full of retirees and young families, until drugs arrived a few years back. Now, gangs controlled everything. She asked if they knew they were there, and he confirmed they did, but led her inside anyway. In the basement, a group of young people gathered around makeshift bedding and candlelight. One girl, her leg now bandaged, explained that the Hawks had given her a warning about the sugar daddies. Another asked if she had been with them, and she clarified it hadn't been by choice. A boy with goggles checked on supplies, noting that the upcoming shipment meant visitors. He mentioned getting ammo, though another reminded him that the gangs controlled everything. Outside, a wall bore the message, "You can't ignore us anymore." The elderly's gang had arrived, and they had injured a young girl. Inside, a boy bragged about taking down a member of the Flying Aces alone. They discussed hidden weapons. The Silver Wolves had attacked them the week before, forcing them to move after beating Lisa badly. Lisa had escaped, but the drug-fueled gang chased her. When they lost track of her, they decided to wait for the next shipment. Inside, the survivors had had enough. This time, they were ready. When the gang returned, the standoff turned bloody. One girl shot an attacker, calmly stating that he wouldn't get what he wanted, but she would. Media later mocked the elderly gangs, blaming their violence on Rigora, a drug keeping them aggressive. Protests erupted, demanding bans on the drug. The fight wasn't over. The authorities cracked down, but the violence continued. In different cities, from Cloverton to Miami Beach, people like the gang survivors knew the fight was far from over. The elderly gangs were a rising force, determined to take back what they believed was theirs. Wolf Girl Eats by Bruce Jones and Richard Corbin. A bus labelled Salvation made its way toward Angel Falls, carrying a group of evangelists. Among them was Peter Milken, who narrated a tale about the one thing even God needed. He pondered what a being with everything could possibly desire, and concluded that it was a woman. The bus arrived at a desolate town, devoid of churches, which the Reverend noted with disapproval. A sign reading, "Wolf Girl Eats 2 miles," caught their attention. Dismissed as a crude joke, they decided to seek out lost souls, but first prioritized their own nourishment. Stopping at a rundown diner, they observed the place's unsettling decor and ordered food. A local snickered that the mute waitress would bring them the blue plate special, regardless of what they asked for. Another offered to show them a zoo for a small fee. The group reluctantly followed, encountering caged, malnourished animals. The Reverend, noting the lack of television antennas in town, declared that these people were ripe for conversion. A local then mentioned a particular attraction, the Wolf Gal, a wild child, supposedly raised by wolves. Later, at their revival tent, the Reverend contemplated temptation and control. He acknowledged that power might be what God truly desired. The crowd was small, and he worried about losing them, but a film projector captured their attention, igniting their fervour. That night, they encountered a local who invited them to see the Wolf Girl for free. The man described her as untamed, untouched by human hands. They followed him to a pit where a feral, naked, red-haired girl crouched. Milken, transfixed, questioned who she belonged to. The man laughed, saying she belonged to the woods. That night, Milken dreamed of her, struggling with his own temptation. The Reverend, overhearing his murmurs, accused him of desiring the girl, calling it a disgrace. Milken struggled with his temptation for the wolf girl, recalling the first time he felt love as a lonely runaway. The Reverend called him to seek salvation, urging him to drink from God's silver cup. When Milken hesitated, the Reverend warned him to purge jealousy from his soul, but Milken defiantly declared he would do so only after stripping the girl from his thoughts. He fled, leaving the Reverend to ponder whether God too could feel loneliness when abandoned. At the revival, Sister Amy took over the projector while the Reverend led an impassioned sermon comparing the persecution of Christians by the Romans to their own struggles. The congregation responded zealously, zealously, shouting praises. Meanwhile, the Reverend noticed their numbers had dwindled, discovering that it was gambling night, which had drawn the townspeople away. He expressed frustration, but an old man saw an opportunity, suggesting it was the perfect time to visit the wolf girl. The Reverend, sweating and conflicted, approached the girl, convincing himself she needed help. When he reached out, Milken lunged at him with a knife, and he cried out for divine strength. Milken the girl of being the devil, and accused the Reverend of succumbing to her corruption. A struggle broke out. The Reverend stabbed Milken and killed him. The town erupted in cheers as the crowd revealed that Milken's fall had been orchestrated as part of their entertainment. The Reverend, devastated, realized too late that he had taught them cruelty. In the final chaos, the townspeople unleashed a pack of wild animals, and the Reverend, overcome by despair, was devoured. The story closed on Angel Falls, burning in the distance as the lesson of human weakness was painfully made clear. Flinch Part 2, Maggie and Her Microscope by Dean Motter and Bill Sienkiewicz. Maggie, a young girl, lived with her father, a scientist, and Mrs. Golden, who helped around the house after Maggie's mother died. Her father was deeply involved in research on diseases and had a laboratory that no one was allowed to enter. Maggie spent her summer at home, rather than at a special school, observing the world through her microscope. Her best friend was Kitty, a stray cat that her father and Mrs. Golden disapproved of. Maggie found comfort in looking at things under her microscope, particularly germs, which she believed had their own little world. Her father was preoccupied with studying a mysterious plague that, according to him, only affected animals. He dismissed concerns about human susceptibility, despite receiving marked biohazard materials from the CDC. Meanwhile, Maggie was left under Mrs. Golden's watch, though the woman struggled to monitor her constantly. Maggie listened to conversations about her father's research and formed her own ideas about germs, disease, and contamination. As her father debated moving her to a facility for emotionally disturbed children, Maggie examined germs under her microscope, imagining them as a small family mirroring her own. She began to believe that by feeding and caring for the germs, she could keep them happy and prevent harm to animals. She sought to control them, convinced that understanding germs would help her make the world better. Maggie's behavior became more erratic. She asked for extra food, claiming it was for Kitty, but secretly intending to feed the germs. She observed the germs like a miniature family, anthropomorphizing them. She believed that giving them food would stop them from hurting others, and, in turn, prevent her father from having to destroy them. Eventually, Maggie fell sick, growing pale and weak. Mrs. Golden found her exhausted, having spent nights fixated on her microscope. Her health declined rapidly. In a delusional state, she spoke about the germ family, detailing their sickness and struggles as though they were real people. She described how they fell ill one by one, culminating in a feverish vision of destruction of her germ family by a monster. Her condition worsened. Maggie kept going in and out of coma. Her father and Mrs. Golden panicked. They realized Maggie had been exposed to the plague. The cat, Kitty, was implicated as the carrier, bringing the germs into the house. They found a dead mole on Maggie's bed. Maggie's father took it to his lab for study. Kitty, however, turned out to be a source of antibodies. Maggie sat with Mrs. Golden thinking that everyone would die. Right then, Kitty scratched Mrs. Golden. She panicked, but Maggie's father came with an antidote. He claimed to have created from the dead mole, which was hosting a colony of antibodies. He injected Mrs. Golden and told her to pack her bags. In the end, Mrs. Golden left, and Maggie accepted isolation with her father and Kitty, retreating further into her world of microscopic observation. Her father could only watch with tearful eyes. Found Object by Bob Fingerman and Pat McKeown. On Monday at 5:25 p.m, Sean walked with her friend, venting about Jim's irritating habit of making small bets. She found his constant need to be right insufferable and called it part of the male persona. She admitted she had confronted him before, but the only way to humble him was to prove him wrong. The next day, Tuesday at 5:21 p.m, while walking through the city, she noticed a photograph on the ground. Curious, she picked it up and examined examined it, a picture of a man in a suit with a smug expression. Intrigued, she decided to take it home, commenting on the man in the picture that he was coming with her. At home, she placed the photograph on her refrigerator, telling it that this was its new home. On Wednesday at 5:31 p.m, she met with a friend who asked if she and Jim had settled their differences. Sean explained that they had a wager going, and if she won, that would be the end of it. She continued about her day, satisfied with her ongoing plan. By Thursday at 5:29 p.m, she had added more photographs to her collection, each one increasingly unsettling, including dismembered arms. She maintained a sense of smugness about her experiment, convinced of her own cleverness. On Friday at 5:27 p.m, she noticed the photographs she had been leaving behind remained untouched. She continued her routine without concern. By Saturday at 5:30 p.m, she checked again and confirmed that no one had picked them up. She found satisfaction in proving her belief that people had no curiosity. On Sunday at 5:30 p.m, she made her final check. With a triumphant smirk, she declared victory. However, Jim's head appeared in a plastic bag, his smirk eerily absent. With casual indifference, she asked, "So Jimbo, where's my dollar?" Food Chain by Brian Azzarello and Eduardo Risso. Officers Turo and Whistler were monitoring a sting operation from a surveillance room, listening to a live feed from a planted microphone. On the other end, FBI agent Tony Gomez was meeting drug lord Carlos Lugo. Gomez was working undercover in Lugo's gang. In the surveillance room, a nature documentary played in the background, narrating how hyenas, despite being scavengers, were ruthless predators capable of crushing bones. Whistler returned from outside, complaining about being hungry, while Turo greeted him with a crude joke. Turo dismissed it and asked if he had missed anything interesting. Turo asked where he had gone for dinner. Whistler casually mentioned a rib joint, saying he would miss it once the stakeout ended. Turo told him to enjoy it, as it was his last meal. The comment made Whistler pause, asking why. The response was ominous. Things were about to get good, which was exactly why he did these things. Suddenly, Turo and Whistler heard Lugo snap. He accused Tony Gomez of betraying him and, without hesitation, smashed him in the face with a baseball bat. Turo and Whistler, still listening in, heard the blow land. Turo reacted with morbid amusement, noting how Lugo had hit him hard. Whistler, however, froze when Turo asked who was on the receiving end. The answer was chilling: Tony Gomez. Shocked, Whistler processed the reality that Gomez had been undercover for 2 years, and now his cover was blown. Whistler got up to rush to Lugo's hideout, but Turo coldly told him to sit down. Turo told Whistler that someone had informed Lugo about Gomez's deal with the Jamaicans. That was what Lugo was angry about. He had no idea that Gomez was FBI. So, if Lugo killed an FBI agent and Turo and Whistler could record Gomez's murder on tape, then the jury would fry Lugo without doubt. As they listened, Lugo grabbed a knife while his men held Gomez in place. Gomez's screams filled up the room. Turo coldly kept eating, while Whistler sickened, turned away to wash his face. Turo spoke to him from the room, telling him that he knew it was Whistler who had fed the information to Lugo. When Whistler denied, Turo told him that he knew that Whistler was having an affair with Gomez's wife, and that's why he had Lugo kill him. But in a way, that would help Turo to have Lugo off the streets and into the gas chamber. That was the quicker way, Whistler admitted. He asked how Turo figured it out. Turo kept speaking coldly, asking Whistler if he knew that Gomez's wife was a model. Turo browsed through old magazines and showed her raunchy photos to Whistler, telling him that he had played well. Whistler started sweating like a racehorse. At that instant, they heard Lugo's voice. He ordered a shotgun, preparing to end Gomez's suffering. Emilio, another man in the room, was told to step aside. A loud gunshot followed. Gomez had been killed. Turo and Whistler geared up, weapons in hand, ready to take Lugo down. Whistler, shaking, asked Turo if he was going to share his findings. Turo mysteriously replied, "Who am I going to tell?" Before heading in, Turo casually asked Whistler a crude joke about the difference between a beaver and an apple pie. Whistler, distracted, asked what. Turo smirked. "It was okay to eat your mum's apple pie." Whistler, still surprised, asked how Turo had figured out the truth about Gomez's wife. Turo, in a grim voice, revealed the shocking twist. Gomez's wife was his sister. Whistler broke down, sweating and shaking. Turo placed his hand on his shoulder and said, "Come on, Whistler, let's go get the bad guys." Flinch Part 3 Night Terrors by John Rossum and Kelly Jones. A boy named Paul visited his aunt and uncle's house for Thanksgiving. While talking to another boy outside, he mentioned that he lived in California and was only visiting. The other boy asked if he believed in witches. Paul hesitated, saying his dad had told him they weren't real. The boy smirked, dismissing that as something parents say to keep kids from being scared. He then asked Paul if he had ever stayed up past midnight. Paul admitted he had, but the boy called him a liar, saying if he had, he wouldn't be there. The boy then explained that at midnight, witches, ghosts, goblins and monsters came out invisible to adults but able to see children. If they found a child awake, they would take them away and eat them. He pointed to a missing child poster on a tree, suggesting that was what had happened to her. Paul, unnerved, asked how he knew this. The boy claimed to have seen other missing posters, even receiving them in the mail. Paul argued that adults stayed up past midnight all the time. The boy dismissed that, saying goblins didn't eat grown-ups because they didn't taste good. Later, Paul lay in bed, unable to sleep. His mother reassured him it was just because of jet lag, but Paul insisted he had to fall asleep before midnight, afraid that if he stayed awake, the witches would take him. His parents tried to soothe him, telling him witches weren't real. His father even laughed, saying he had read the same scary books as a child, but Paul wasn't convinced. As midnight approached, Paul lay in bed, sweating and terrified. Shadows moved in the room, forming monstrous shapes. The sounds of the house unsettled him. He struggled to sleep, fearing that if he stayed awake too long, the creatures would come for him. The clock struck 12. For a moment, nothing happened. Paul exhaled in relief, feeling foolish for believing the story. He was happy to have survived, feeling like it was his birthday. He went to the kitchen and heated some milk in the microwave machine. His face turned pale as he saw the microwave timer, 11:59 p.m. He realized the house's grandfather clock had been running fast. A dark figure emerged from the shadows, whispering his name. The next morning, all that remained was a spilled milk carton with the missing girl's photo printed on it. A Walk in the Park by Scott Cunningham and Marcello Fusin. Mrs. Whitechurch reflected on the unchanged beauty of the apartment, noting how fresh flowers were placed daily, ensuring nothing ever wilted. It was one of the few things that had remained constant after everything else had changed. Now, she was trapped in a near vegetative state, kept alive by a respirator, unable to move or speak, yet fully aware. The rhythmic sound of chopping filled the air as Lily worked in the kitchen. A man in a suit, presumably Whitechurch's son, informed Lily they would be leaving soon, suggesting a final visit to the park for Mrs. Whitechurch. Lily played her part well, responding with a polite, "Sir," but Mrs. Whitechurch saw through her act. The resentment in Lily's eyes was unmistakable. The man pretended to be warm, but Mrs. Whitechurch knew what had happened after the stroke, and she hated Lily for it. While going out, Lily packed the kitchen knife. Outside, as Lily pushed her wheelchair through the city, Mrs. Whitechurch observed everything, trapped within her failing body. A homeless man begged for food, and Lily mockingly spat in his cup. He swore at her, and she relished it. Mrs. Whitechurch recalled how she had always been cruel, but after the stroke, the dam of hatred inside her had fully broken. Her body was paralyzed, but her mind remained sharp. She knew Lily had big plans today. At a store, Lily questioned the storekeeper about the lethality of rat poison. Mrs. Whitechurch, though scared, believed that Lily wouldn't kill her because she played a key role in something much larger. At the park, people enjoyed their day, blissfully unaware of what was coming. Lily studied their faces, stating that none of them would be smiling if they realized what lay ahead. Mrs. Whitechurch thought about Lily's testing methods over the last month, tripping people with marbles, poisoning peanuts. Now, Mrs. Whitechurch waited with anticipation to see if today's effort would succeed. A child's panicked scream broke through the air. Lily lingered near a puppet show, watching the innocent children. She claimed to love kids, but Mrs. Whitechurch knew her true thoughts were far darker. She watched as a kid's dog named Rex approached Lily, and Lily gave it a hot dog. Moments later, the boy called out for his dog, Rex, but found him collapsed. The hot dog was poisoned. Chaos ensued. The sight stirred something in Mrs. Whitechurch, a memory of feeling numb, of being trapped in a useless shell. She watched as the beggar from the street passed by without recognizing her. Lily looked at the beggar and considered how a poisoned hot dog might be the best remedy for both of them. As night fell, Lily sat by the lake with Mrs. Whitechurch, reflecting reflecting on how satisfying it was to know how, she left Mrs. Whitechurch by the lakeside and walked towards the beggar. She handed a hot dog to him. It was poisoned, of course, but before he could eat, a police officer ordered Lily to drop the hot dog, recognizing her as a suspect. Then something changed. Mrs. Whitechurch, presumed helpless, felt power surge through her. Her body convulsed. Her eyes glowed. Awareness returned. As the brain fog cleared, it was revealed that all this time it was Mrs. Whitechurch inside Lily's body, and Lily was trapped inside Mrs. Whitechurch's body. But now she had sent Lily's soul back into her own body at the gunpoint of the policeman. Now back in her own body, Lily screamed at Mrs. Whitechurch that she would perish in her old body. However, she would survive even in jail. Mrs. Whitechurch spoke telepathically. She taunted Lily, telling her she was never special, just convenient. Worse, she hinted that her soul could leave this frail body and inhabit another, perhaps a younger, fresher one, maybe of the little boy who called the police. As realization dawned on Lily, she tried to stab her with the knife. The policeman fired. Lily collapsed, lifeless. A police officer, oblivious to what had truly transpired, casually wondered what the poor old woman had done to provoke Lily. Satanic by Garth Ennis and Kieran Dwyer. A grand ocean liner set sail, evoking the majesty of the Titanic. Crowds cheered from the docks as the ship departed, its 4 smokestacks billowing into the sky. The passengers aboard revelled in luxury, dining and socialising in a lively atmosphere. However, the mood darkened, subtly at first, as the elegant guests' faces began to twist with sinister expressions. What started as a dream of grandeur turned into something far more unsettling. Below deck, the atmosphere was starkly different. The lower-class passengers ate together in a simple setting, unaware of the horrors about to unfold. Suddenly, the upper-class passengers, now fully revealed as a blood-craving cult, stormed in, brandishing weapons. They violently attacked, dragging people from their seats. Panic erupted as the rich brutalized the poor, slaughtering them in a chaotic bloodbath. A woman with a crazed grin raised an axe, while others stabbed and ripped into their victims with glee. The massacre escalated into pure madness. The elite tore the bodies apart, consuming flesh and reveling in the carnage. Satanic rituals were held as naked figures arranged body parts into a grotesque pentagram. They performed a dark ceremony, raising their blood-soaked hands in unholy ecstasy. The slaughter continued over multiple days. April 10th, April 11th, April 12th, each day bringing more bloodshed. As the carnage raged, passengers attempted to flee. Women and children cowered in rooms, but the crazed aristocrats broke down doors, dragging them out. A man lunged with a knife, his face twisted in demonic hunger. People were dismembered, their remains held up as trophies. The days moved forward again. April 13th, April 14th, marking the days of relentless horror. Then the ship itself began to sink. The remaining survivors scrambled for lifeboats while the ocean swallowed the vessel. Some of the monstrous passengers continued their acts of depravity even as the waters rose. Finally, the ship plunged beneath the waves. In the freezing water, the remaining survivors, both human and inhuman, floated among the wreckage. Some clung to life, screaming, "We deserved it," as if realizing their punishment. A colossal satanic figure loomed in the stormy sky, roaring the same phrase, "You deserved it," as the damned passengers sank into the abyss. Lifeboats drifted in the aftermath, their passengers staring at an iceberg. One man hesitated before stating, "Yes, an iceberg, that'll do." As they agreed on this explanation, a bloodied, dismembered head floated on a wooden board. Years later, a closing thought reassured the ones who knew the truth. Look on the bright side, no Celine Dion. Flinch Part 4, A Gift of Friendship by Kent Williams. A man stood in the freezing wilderness, his breath heavy as he looked down at his companion who lay dying in the snow. The man had killed his friend's eyes widened with shock and betrayal. The man gasped, questioning whether the cold had bitten his friend as he drew his last breath. His inner voice reminded him that the cold had been the least of his worries. Memories surfaced. The man had not realized his friend knew the truth for 3 months until the moment he saw him standing there, gun in hand. For all that time, the betrayal had remained hidden, meticulously planned. Their hunting trips to the northern wilderness had always been a cherished escape, a return to adventure and camaraderie. Their friends had called them Lewis and Clark, and the thrill of the wild had made them feel invincible. But this time, something had been different. His friend had brought him here with purpose, knowing the landscape well enough to ensure the body would never be found. They had joked about such things before, dark humour over a bottle of scotch by the campfire. Who would question a hunting accident? Who would suspect treachery between two lifelong friends? Regret settled in. He had been blind, too caught up in his own plans with his friend's wife, his own desires, never suspecting that his friend had plans of his own. He had thought only of his love for Mary, his friend's wife. Had Mary initiated it, or had he? He no longer knew. The moments leading up to it had been subtle, unspoken, a lingering glance, a touch that lasted too long, a temptation that had become impossible to resist. As the man thought all these, he buried his dead friend's body, whom he had killed. On his way back to civilization, realization dawned too late. His friend had led him to the perfect spot, knowing he would take the southern path, always the quickest route back to civilization. His eagerness to return home had only sealed his fate, as the ground beneath him gave way and he fell inside a deep cave below from where he could never get out. His killer had covered every trace, ensuring that no one would suspect foul play. The man realized that his friend had lied when he took Mary to visit her relatives in Maine. His friend had supposedly left her there to take care of her ill sister, but the man realized that the truth was something else. Mary's corpse, days old, sat there in the open grave with him. His friend had already killed Mary. Now, in the darkness, the man saw the totality of what had happened, the horrific beauty of it all. Fair Trade by Ty Templeton. A desperate man, clad in his underwear, performed a dark ritual in his basement. He slit the throat of a goat, collecting its blood for the summoning. Skeptical about the goat's virginity, he reassured himself by adding 3 drops of holy water before drinking the concoction. Gagging from the foul taste, he waited for the ritual to take effect. Right on cue, a grinning, hulking red demon materialized before him. The demon, delighted by the summoning, asked if the man wished to barter his soul, offering him riches, power and love. The demon watched as the man immediately fixated on love. The man, desperate for Agatha Hartford from his office's marketing department, lamented his unrequited feelings, revealing that she was in love with Stuart, the maintenance guy. The demon gleefully confirmed the deal, urging the man to sign over his soul. Just as he was about to sign, a voice interrupted. A second demon, dressed in a suit and introducing himself as Pluto from Underworld Barter Unlimited, offered an alternative deal. Due to new antitrust regulations in Hell, the soul harvesting industry had been split, ensuring more competitive deals. Pluto sweetened the offer, guaranteeing Agatha's love, along with a winning lottery ticket. The original demon fumed, insisting Pluto was a relic of the past. The competition escalated. Pluto pitched financial benefits, while the red demon tried to offer power. Other minor demons chimed in, pushing ridiculous incentives like free cable and Belgian chocolate. Overwhelmed, the man simply stood baffled. Spoilt of choices, he kept pondering on the best deal. Playing Dead by Bruce Jones and Paul Galassi. Private Harve Emery lay motionless in the tall grass, his face drenched in sweat as he forced himself to remain perfectly still. His training had taught him that survival depended on playing dead. He ignored the screams and approaching footsteps, focusing instead on a praying mantis resting on his face. The Pawnee warriors moved through the battlefield, ensuring no one had survived. When morning arrived, the raiders had gone, leaving behind scalped bodies. Harve, miraculously alive, surveyed the scene and realized he couldn't return to the fort without being accused of desertion. He would be hanged there. His only option was to ride north. He discovered a lone ranch house deep in the mountains, eerily quiet. A half-scalped corpse lay outside, confirming that the Pawnee had already been there. Inside, the dining table was set as if someone had been expecting company. He called out, but received no response. As he explored, he found a woman naked in bed. She called for him. Startled, Harve demanded answers, but she stared at him, recognizing him as her husband, Harve Holton. Confused, he played along, realizing she had retreated into a delusion after the attack. Nadine welcomed him back with a mixture of joy and unsettling familiarity. She spoke of how she feared he would leave her, but now he was home, where he belonged. Harve saw a portrait of the real Harve Holton and noted their resemblance, save for a beard. He rationalized that Nadine had suffered a breakdown and decided to stay, assuming the role of her lost husband. Days turned into weeks. Nadine showered him with affection, but something about her gaze unsettled him. He contemplated growing a beard and fully embracing the life Holton had left behind. When a group of Pawnee warriors passed by, they didn't acknowledge him. He speculated they believed he was a ghost, already dead. He considered using this to his advantage. As the months went on, Harv embraced his new identity. He abandoned his military past, trading in his army rifle for a hunting rifle, his uniform for civilian clothes. He settled into the rancher's life, though Nadine's behavior became increasingly erratic. In her mind, he was always Holton, and she seemed possessive, almost desperate. Then, the cavalry arrived at the ranch, searching for survivors. Harv panicked, believing they were looking for him. Nadine, however, greeted them without suspicion, and they went away. Harv found Holton's old journal, reading entries that grew increasingly distressed. The last pages of the journal revealed Nadine had been captured by the Pawnee after their attack. The warriors had taken turns with her, laughing as they forced her husband to watch. When they finally left, something in Nadine had changed. Her gaze, her demeanor. Holton had written that her presence haunted him, that he feared staying in the ranch, but feared leaving even more. Harv realized that the Pawnee avoided the ranch, not because of him, but because of Nadine. They sensed something unnatural about her. He understood too late. As Nadine called him to bed, a look of horror overtook his face. He tried to remain still, to play dead, but it was too late. She raised her knife and kept stabbing him repeatedly, and not one scream came out of Harv's mouth. Flinch, Part 5, Betrothed, by Joe R. Lansdale and Rick Burchett. A man patiently waited for his love on what he considered their wedding day. He dressed his best, preparing for their wedding night. He thought about her, recalling how lovely she was. He stood outside Wildwood Cemetery as a hearse approached. He read an obituary featuring the face of a blonde woman, a victim of the Greenville Ripper. He anticipated holding her in his arms soon, dismissing concerns about his previous marriages. He admitted he had been married multiple times before, all to women who, like her, had been victims of the same murderer. Armed with a shovel, he entered the cemetery, ready to dig up his newest bride. He justified his actions by saying that death had never truly separated him from his wives, but rather that their bodies simply deteriorated over time. As he exhumed the corpse, he greeted the deceased woman, preparing for their marriage. He began dragging the body away, eager to consummate his marriage, but before he could escape with his bride, a car ran them over. The driver stepped out. It was the Greenville Ripper himself, the very murderer responsible for the blonde woman's death. He recognized her as his last victim, recalling how long she lasted. Disgusted by the grave robber's actions, he remarked that while torture and murder were one thing, defiling a corpse was beyond sanity. The Ripper drove away, leaving the bodies of the blonde woman and the disturbed man behind. As he sped off, he muttered, "You got to be sick for that kind of thing." Peeping Bobby, by Colin Raff and James Romberger. A man named Bob spent his days spying on his neighbours through a hole in his apartment wall. He had an elaborate setup filled with money, a sex mannequin, and a fixation on the couple next door. Every evening, between 6 and 7, the couple engaged in intimate activities, and Bob always made sure to watch. However, something different happened that night. The man, Russ, covered his girlfriend Mona's face with a plastic bag, suffocating and seemingly killing her. Bob, stunned, realised he had just witnessed a murder. Fear gripped Bob as he considered reporting what he saw, but his own voyeuristic habits made him hesitate. He worried that an investigation would expose him. After a sleepless night, he encountered Russ in the hallway, who greeted him casually. Bob panicked, wondering if Russ knew he had been watching. Later, a power outage forced Bob into the basement. There, he discovered a dishevelled woman, Mona, the same woman he thought was dead. She claimed Russ had tried to kill her and locked her there thinking she was dead. She begged for help. Bob hesitated, but ultimately took her to his apartment. Mona explained that Russ was a dangerous criminal. She couldn't go to the police without implicating herself in illegal activities, but Bob could help her get evidence. She convinced him to record Russ talking to a criminal associate. Bob, eager to help, used his spying setup to capture the meeting through the hole in his wall. At daybreak, Bob set up the camera while Mona watched. As the recording started, Bob looked through the camera display. He he watched a girl return home and Russ greeting her with a kiss, and that girl was none other than Mona. Bob was horrified. He turned his head to talk to Mona sitting in his room. Mona was looking at him with a horrific smile, and she had completely twisted her neck backwards. Bob looked through the camera display and found that she was not Mona, but the sex mannequin in his room. Russ and Mona were playing a perverted sex game the other day. As Bob struggled to gather his sanity, Mona said to Russ in the other room, "This time, you get to play dead." Fumes by Mark Wheatley and Mark Hempel. Brennan Doyle fixated on a woolly mammoth painting while struggling with a headache. He imagined himself in the past, watching hunters from afar. The painting irritated him further because it was used as eco-propaganda. A passionate environmentalist ranted about pollution, calling people pollution Nazis who had dulled human senses. He blamed modern life for stripping people of their primal instincts and accused Doyle of being part of the problem. A heated argument broke out between Doyle and the environmentalist, centering on ChemNation, an industrial company accused of heavy pollution. Doyle, defending his company, argued that it followed federal guidelines, but the environmentalist dismissed these as bought regulations. He pointed to the smokestacks, highlighting how ChemNation's operations poisoned the air. Doyle countered that ChemNation also funded environmental groups, but the activists called these groups puppets, meant to manipulate public perception. Doyle scoffed at their paranoia, but they insisted that industry corruption was real. That night, Doyle's headache worsened, driving him to take pills and alcohol for relief. He slept fitfully, but by morning, he felt better. As he went through his routine, he noticed overpowering smells. The sourness of his milk, the artificial scent of his soap. Driving to work, the fumes from the freeway sickened him, making the air unbearable. He coughed violently, his senses overwhelmed by every odour around him. Upon arriving at ChemNation, he crashed his car into a flower bed, nearly suffocating on the scent of crushed flowers. Inside the office, he tried to escape the overwhelming odours. The smell of sweat, perfume, and even shaving lotion from his colleagues felt suffocating. He covered his face with duct tape to block out the assault on his senses, but the adhesive smell made him gag. He passed out in his office, only to wake up with an oxygen mask, surrounded by doctors. They explained he had developed extreme sensitivity to smells. Even with the mask, he detected the room's odours, including a doctor's foot fungus. Forced to leave work, Doyle rode home with oxygen tanks, but even through his mask, he smelled traces of humanity in the cab. His driver dismissed him as crazy. At home, he removed all furniture, carpets and drapes, desperate to eliminate any source of odour. Still, everything stank. He scrubbed obsessively, but the smell of detergent irritated him. Using only water didn't help. His own sweat became unbearable. He shaved his body, but the odour persisted. He clipped his fingernails and toenails, believing they were the new source of the stench. Completely unravelling, he wandered the polluted city, convinced the eco-activists had been right. He smelled acid and toxins in the air, realising that society had been numbing itself to the damage. Entering ChemNation, he approached Vice President Crofton, who was horrified by his transformation. Doyle, nearly skeletal, declared that he could smell everything: pollution, deception, even sickness. He told Crofton he could smell cancer in his body, advising him to get checked. Security restrained Doyle as Crofton dismissed him as insane. As Crofton wondered about Doyle's breakdown, the secretary commented, "Maybe it's something in the air." Flinch Part 6. Dead Woman Walking by William Messner, Lobes and Duncan Fegredo. Alice met with Dr. Oakes, who greeted her warmly. Alice, who had returned despite the circumstances of her death, explained that she was there purely by willpower. She mentioned that Dan sent his regards. Dr. Oakes inquired if things between her and Dan were better, and Alice confirmed that it felt just like their honeymoon. The doctor was pleased that she had moved past her difficulties, to which Alice bluntly responded, mentioning the small detail of Dan having killed her. Alice recounted that she and Dan had worked through the issue, though Dan had more trouble accepting her resurrection than she did. Dr. Oakes asked if Alice had been angry with Dan. Alice admitted she was furious, especially from the moment she realised Dan and Denise had poisoned her. She recalled how they had mocked her in her final moments, revealing that Dan had only married her for her money and had been having an affair with Denise for months. As she convulsed in her death throes, they had sex right in front of her. which infuriated her beyond belief. The doctor found her reaction understandable, but Alice emphasized that her anger had lasted through the funeral and burial. It was that fury that drove her to reclaim control of her body, refusing to let them have the last word. Alice explained how she clawed her way out of her grave through sheer willpower, a trait she had always possessed. Dr. Oakes acknowledged Alice's accomplishments, putting herself and her sisters through college, turning her florist business into a multinational corporation. But Alice admitted that what she had valued most was her seemingly perfect marriage. Realizing it had been a lie devastated her. The doctor reminded her that she had been murdered, which should not be overlooked. Alice agreed, but confessed that she had initially planned to punish Dan and Denise, only to realize that she still felt like the same person she was before death. Even as enraged as she was, she could not bring herself to harm them. Instead, she made Dan take her to bed. Alice described how Dan reacted to her return with a mix of horror and twisted passion. He tore off her burial garments and went at her with an unexpected intensity, which she found surprising, but ultimately unsurprising given the circumstances. However, the experience became more surreal when Denise joined them. Alice's decayed body literally came apart in the act, her limbs and grave fluids mixing with theirs. Despite expecting to be permanently destroyed, her body inexplicably reassembled itself afterward. She stayed in the house, as it was still hers, despite repeated attempts from Dan and Denise to kill her again. Since she was already dead, they could not succeed. The doctor found her humour about the situation reassuring. Alice noted that Dan had inherited everything legally, and since she was legally deceased, she had no means to reclaim her assets or press charges. Seeking help, she even approached their pastor, but he was unsympathetic, likely due to the generous donations Dan had made in her memory. However, the pastor, believing she was a resurrection miracle, secretly asked if she could bring others back to life. She tried, but it didn't work. Alice explained that eventually her continued existence became an issue. People spoke behind her back, and a consensus formed that she should return to her grave. She agreed, lying back down as they covered her with dirt and poured holy water on her. However, as they buried her, she suddenly panicked and started screaming uncontrollably. Her cries did not go unanswered. Other corpses in the graveyard, stirred by her example, clawed their way to the surface and attacked the living. The chaos escalated as the dead overran the area, slaughtering those present. Dan, Denise, and even the minister were among the resurrected. Alice observed that while she could not bring back the dead herself, she had seemingly taught them how. She admitted it surprised her. Dr. Oakes found the situation ironic. Alice agreed, explaining that in the end, everyone around her had unresolved issues with how things had played out. Dr. Oakes asked if this was why she wanted anger management. Alice confirmed that it was, as the entire ordeal had been fueled by bottled-up emotions. Dr. Oakes scheduled her next group session for Wednesday, and Alice promised she would not miss it. As she left, she entered a waiting room filled with other undead individuals seeking therapy, signaling that she was not alone in her struggles. Elgro by Ivan Velez Jr. and Hoche Anderson. Oswaldo's wails echoed through the house on Sunday, a constant, inescapable presence in Rosario and Victor's lives. Rosario lay beside Victor, exhausted, staring at the ceiling. She noted how Oswaldo never called for Victor, only for her. Victor barely acknowledged it, lighting a cigarette while Rosario got up to tend to their son. The cries never ceased, part of the routine that weighed them down. On Monday, Oswaldo dreamed of his childhood, of running and laughing with Ronaldo, but the dream always ended the same. Ronaldo collapsing, his body lifeless. Oswaldo woke, his breath hitching, the pain fresh as ever. Rosario shushed him, stroking his hair, though her reassurances meant nothing. In the kitchen, Victor made an offhand comment, wondering if life would have been different if they'd had daughters instead of sons. Rosario sighed and set a plate of food in front of Oswaldo, feeding him as she always did. On Tuesday, Victor returned home to silence, a stark contrast to the past, when his sons would greet him with laughter. He called out, but no one responded. With a resigned sigh, he wandered into Oswaldo's room, only to be confronted with a grotesque sight: Oswaldo eating his mother alive. Victor woke up gasping. On Wednesday, desperation drove Vitor to La Clínica Negra. Sitting across from a nurse, he confessed how his family had fallen apart after Ronaldo's death. Oswaldo shut down, and Rosario continued feeding him him, letting him grow into a prisoner of his own body. Victor believed Oswaldo was suffering in his own hell. The nurse handed him a bag of powdered pills, instructing him to mix it into his son's food. She told him to whisper Oswaldo's name into a stone, press it to his chest, and bury it beneath the open sky before completing the act. That night, Oswaldo dreamt of Ronaldo again. In his dream, Ronaldo assured him that he had found peace, and Oswaldo needed to go live his life. He woke up crying. While hearing his cries, Victor hesitated in the kitchen, staring at the powder. Rosario saw the hesitation and decided not to let him do it alone. Then, without warning, Oswaldo moved. For the first time in years, he stood, his grotesquely swollen body towering over them. He wailed, his loneliness erupting in a deafening cry before he collapsed, crushing them beneath his weight. Days later, authorities broke into the house, drawn by the overwhelming stench. Oswaldo lay atop his parents' bodies, still alive despite the impossible conditions. Doctors noted that though he was brain dead, his body refused to die, a burden left to rot in a hospital bed. In his mind, however, Oswaldo was free. Ronaldo called to him, urging him to run. Their parents were there too, smiling. Oswaldo, once again a child, followed them, lost forever in his memories. The Day Wife by Philip Hester. The narrator, a self-described morning person, had always seen the night as nothing more than a time for rest. However, he had been struggling with sleep recently. Lying beside his wife on the night of their second wedding anniversary, he traced his fingers along her spine and discovered something unsettling, a seam at the back of her neck. Initially mistaking it for a scar, he stared at it in disbelief, wondering how he had never noticed it before, despite countless nights spent together. Driven by curiosity, he carefully tugged at the seam. It came apart easily, as if barely sealed. A soft blue glow emanated from beneath, casting a warmth across his face. Panic surged through him, and he quickly pressed the edges back together, watching as they resealed themselves instantly. Disturbed but exhausted, he fell asleep without further incident. His wife woke before dawn as usual, oblivious to what had happened. As she kissed his forehead before leaving for work, he began to doubt his own experience, wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. That evening, they celebrated their anniversary with dinner and dancing. The night felt significant. It was the first time they had truly spent time together in months due to their work obligations. While dancing, he slid his hand behind her neck, searching for the seam. It was still there, but he quickly withdrew his fingers, not wanting to raise suspicion. Later that night, after another restless encounter, he succumbed to his growing obsession and pulled at the seam again, this time without hesitation. The skin peeled away effortlessly, revealing a radiant blue figure beneath. She was graceful, silent, and inhumanly beautiful. Her skin shimmered with an otherworldly glow. His wife, or what remained of her, lay discarded on the bed, while the glowing being sat up before him. Without speaking, they embraced, engaging in an intimacy that felt pure, almost divine. As he drifted into sleep, he watched as the night wife climbed back into the discarded skin, slipping it on like a garment. He fell asleep before she reached the head. In the days that followed, he became obsessed with the transformation. He did everything he could to tire his wife out, exhausting her with long work days, outings, and hours of mindless television. At night, she would shed her skin, and they would lose themselves in passionate encounters, unlike anything they had shared before. But as time passed, his wife became increasingly fatigued during the day. Her skin looked paler, more ill-fitting. She grew irritable and withdrawn, and he began to suspect that she knew about the night wife, but chose to remain silent. One night, after their usual routine, she fell asleep without returning to her daytime form. He carefully folded the empty skin into a neat package, ensuring the face was buried, and burned it. As he watched the smoke rise, he reassured himself he had not killed his wife. She was still there, lying in their bed. In the following days, she adapted fully to the night wife's form. She went through the motions of her old life, working and making phone calls, but she never spoke to him. Their encounters became less passionate, their connection more distant. He felt drained, his sleep no longer providing relief. Occasionally, he would wake to find her watching him, her eyes unreadable. One morning, he discovered something new. While shaving, he noticed a seam running along the bottom of his own jawline. It was loose and sore. He touched it gently, a cold realization settling over him. He had always considered himself a morning person. Flinch Part 7, Parade by Devin Grayson and Phil Jimenez. On Halloween night in 1999, Castro Street in San Francisco pulsed with life as a pride parade filled the streets. John, dressed in a suit, hurried after his son, Brian, who ran ahead, ignoring his father's repeated calls to return. Brian accused him of hypocrisy, insisting that he hadn't chased him all the way there just to bring him home, but because he wanted to see it all again. John wove through the dense crowd, drawing the attention of Grant, an old acquaintance who greeted him with enthusiasm. Grant remarked on how many years had passed. Recalling when John was married and had a child, John awkwardly confirmed that he was searching for his son. A bystander overheard and scoffed at the idea, suggesting that John couldn't outrun his past. Charlie, a former friend in an elaborate Pierrot costume, appeared and greeted John with exaggerated enthusiasm. He mocked John's corporate attire and reminded him of the time they worked together on Harvey Milk's campaign before John had turned conservative. He playfully but pointedly accused John of having abandoned his ideals. The barbed remarks unsettled John, but he pressed on. Moving deeper into the crowd, John ran into Ramon, another familiar face, who recalled their time volunteering at a clinic. Ramon asked if John had gotten sick, prompting John to quickly insist that he was negative. The conversation turned to Robert, a shared acquaintance, and when Ramon mentioned the loss of another friend, Cece, John hesitated. John offered his jacket in a quiet gesture of support. Ramon took it, but reminded John that it wasn't about the jacket. A former colleague confronted him next, seething with resentment. He accused John of outing him at work to avoid sitting next to him, an act that led to his firing. John attempted to deny it, but the man cut him off, claiming that being outed had ultimately been a relief. He had found another job and had thrown himself the most extravagant coming-out party imaginable. John finally spotted Brian, but before he could reach him, Robert intercepted him. Dressed as a nun, Robert glared at John and confronted him about the past, reminding him of the day John had left him waiting at the airport with 2 tickets to Hawaii. He compared the experience to being abandoned at the altar and lashed out, demanding to see John as he truly was. Somehow, John had bandages under his corporate attire. A surreal vision overtook John as Brian, now dressed regally, stood before him. He changed into a decaying mummy, and Brian held something out. It was John's heart from the embalming. Urging John to hold on to it, he insisted it was essential. John realized that had died inside, and the parade was his own purgatory, where he was reminded of his true self. As John reached for it, the urn crumbled in his grasp, and his body withered. He knelt holding his dried-up heart. Reduced to a desiccated husk, the weight of his past bore down on him. Brian's final words echoed, "Hold on to your heart, or you won't be able to miss what you have thrown away." The Toy by Jim Woodring and Randy Duburk. The man found himself lying on the sand, basking in the warmth of an imagined beach. He reassured himself not to move, savouring the illusion of comfort. Disjointed thoughts flooded his mind, questioning what had happened while trying to hold on to the warmth. Symbols and surreal fragments intruded on the scene, twisting his perception. He focused on a girl playing, fixating on her movement, urging her not to disrupt the sand. His reality fractured further as the once idyllic setting morphed. A woman reclined on a chair, amused at his distress. She spoke cryptically about the heat while watching him unravel. His hands, darkened and smeared, reached out desperately as something grotesque burst, sending insects swarming. He panicked, trying to grasp the ungraspable, convinced he had to contain the spreading disaster before it was too late. Seeking relief, he stumbled into a market-like structure, recognizing figures from his past. His parents greeted him with unsettling cheer, celebrating his supposed success. Overwhelmed, he rejected their false praise. His mother lamented his deteriorated state, blaming his decay on the candy sticks consuming him. Janet, a woman he recognized, laughed in his face, mocking his desperation. He pleaded for her help, but she only repeated the same cruel greeting. Reality twisted as he spiraled further into delusion, choking down something unspeakable. He awoke in a hotel, convinced he had escaped, relishing the moment of clarity. But figures reappeared, taunting him. A girl smacked a man, then tore open her chest in a grotesque display. Fire and demons swirled around him as he collapsed, suffocating in his own madness. His cries to make it stop fell on indifferent ears. In the room, junkies sat amongst large TV displays, oblivious of what was happening to the man. The man was actually hooked up to a virtual reality machine while being injected with drugs. It was a toy for others. But for the man, it had already gone out of control. control. He writhed as the machine toyed with his mind. His last coherent thought was a desperate plea, while the others sat and laughed in the room. It Takes a Village by Bill Willingham. Mr. Sorovin arrived at a shop specializing in renting out real monsters. Miss Gruel greeted him warmly, noting that it had been almost 2 years since his last visit. He admitted that traveling from the old country had become more difficult. A receptionist apologized that Alligator Boy was booked until November, but offered Goat Boy instead. Miss Gruel assured Sorovin that life in the Carpathians must have been good for him, insisting he looked better than ever. As they spoke, a young boy, Bobby, scolded Frankie, who was actually Frankenstein's monster, for pulling his stitches again. Frankie nervously explained that he bit his stitches when anxious. The receptionist, handling a call, casually dismissed a request from Count Kirmizikon, reminding him that disability checks wouldn't arrive until the 1st of the month. Meanwhile, a conversation between Gruel and Sorovin continued as she led him to the back while instructing to hold her calls. Frankie, struggling with his detached hand, pleaded for assistance. Bobby, exasperated, reminded him that every time he lost a part, it had to be stitched back on. Frankie apologized, admitting his nervous habits caused the issues. Meanwhile, the receptionist told the Count that he could go public with his complaints, but no one would believe a costume shop was actually renting out real monsters. In the depths of the shop, Miss Gruel led Sorovin into a room filled with monstrous artifacts and creatures. She asked how they could help him this time. He repeated his usual request. He needed a terrifying, bloodthirsty fiend to haunt and terrorize the village of Tuvaletkoy. Gruel, unfazed, assured him they could accommodate his request. She asked if he had anything specific in mind, or if she should choose from their selection of available monsters. She suggested vampires, as he had often used them before. However, Sorovin declined, insisting that vampires would no longer suffice. He admitted that the people of Tuvaletkoy had grown skilled in dealing with them, having become adept at using crosses, holy water, and wooden stakes. Gruel suggested a werewolf, noting that nothing instilled fear like a hungry, rapacious beast. Sorovin revealed that even werewolves were no longer enough. Villagers had begun hunting them for sport. Undeterred, Gruel explored other options, flipping through available creatures. She noted that alpine lakes might be ideal for an aquatic horror, but Sorovin dismissed the idea. Then she found something perfect, an indescribable eldritch horror with fangs, eyes, and tentacles, something of Lovecraftian nature, a Cthulhuloid. Sorovin was immediately interested, agreeing to take it despite the cost. Later, as he left the shop, Miss Gruel inquired why he always sought out the most terrifying creatures to plague Tuvaletkoy. Sorovin insisted that he loved the village dearly. Confused, she pressed for an explanation. He revealed that Tuvaletkoy was an old place, struggling to exist in the modern world. He lamented the decline of traditional values, citing how other villages had suffered from moral decay, families splitting, children born out of wedlock, and youth indulging in sex and drugs. He concluded that nothing strengthened the old ways like a good monster hunt, an event that brought the community together in fear and tradition. He considered himself merely an old man trying to preserve the village's way of life. With a smirk and a wink, he finally revealed his true identity. He was also the town's mayor. Flinch Part 8, Guts, by Greg Rucker and James Romberger. The story followed an FBI agent, Murray, as she recounted a disturbing case involving a man named Robert Lee Calhoun. She spoke with a doctor who asked her to go over what had happened. Murray insisted she already knew the truth and mentioned Calhoun's full name. The conversation turned to Brian Augustus Calhoun, nicknamed Booger, a man deeply intertwined with the town's insular, almost cult-like community. Murray explained that Brian had been raised in the town and was related to nearly everyone there. The FBI had spent months in the area searching for Calhoun, sending out search parties, even calling in military rangers, but they had found nothing. Some of their agents had disappeared. The townspeople resented their presence, seeing them as outsiders interfering with their way of life. To them, Robert Lee Calhoun was a hero despite his violent past, which included bombing a Florida abortion clinic and killing 12 women. Murray interrogated Brian, who was handed handcuffed, asking where Calhoun was. Brian taunted her, claiming they would never catch him, insisting he had left weeks ago when everything was set. He said he and his family had been waiting before revealing anything. He offered to show Mari where Calhoun had gone, hinting at something sinister. Mari reported Brian's statements to her team, instructing them to wear body armor before investigating the location he mentioned, Hagen's Creek. Another agent realized too late that they had been manipulated, that Calhoun had been playing with them the entire time. At a local diner, Mari reflected on the deep-seated hatred people like Brian had for outsiders. Patrons in the diner openly mocked her, throwing slurs and insults. A man held up a flyer depicting Robert Lee Calhoun as a folk hero, urging people to "Run, Bobby, run." Mari realized they had been set up. Later, her team uncovered a mass grave in the forest, filled with skeletal remains stripped clean. An agent identified one of the bodies as a missing military officer. As they continued investigating, they discovered a locked smokehouse. Inside, they found human remains hanging like butchered meat. It was the previous team from the FBI. The townspeople, including Mari and team, had been eating their victims. Mari collapsed in horror as Brian and the others laughed, mocking the agents. They started puking their guts out. Later, at the doctor's chamber, Mari struggled with the trauma, admitting she could still taste human flesh. She told the doctor that Hank had already killed himself, and Glickman was in a madhouse peeling his own skin off. The memory of what had happened haunted her. The doctor said that it was her bitter experience speaking, but then Mari whispered about the human flesh. Not bitter, it was sweet. God help me, so sweet. You've got Hate Mail by Roberto Rodi and Marcelo Frusin. A lady stood at Jerry's door. Jerry peeked outside, anxious and sweating. He was sure that it was the stalker. Jerry was a professional man with a strained personal life. He was being stalked online. The stalker knew about his past, his marriage, the cost of the ring, and even why he divorced his wife. His ex-wife had confronted him angrily, calling him a liar before storming off with their daughter, Noelle. Jerry, feeling emotionally burnt from his past relationships, turned to the internet, believing it was a safer way to connect with people. He engaged in online conversations, unaware that someone was carefully studying his every move. As Jerry participated in explicit chats, one of his partners, Mial, responded flirtatiously at first. Jerry tried to talk raunchy over the chat, but Mial tried to keep it sweet. However, her behavior turned obsessive over time. The more Jerry tried to get rid of her, the clingier she got. Frustrated and confused, he continued frequenting chat rooms, unaware that his stalker was lurking. The messages became more targeted, revealing that someone had been watching him closely. His frustration grew when he realized Miel was following him across multiple chat rooms, gathering information on his interests and habits. Over time, the messages escalated. His stalker revealed they knew his routines, the places he visited, and the things he liked. Jerry tried to block them, but they always found ways to return. One night, he received an email filled with slurs and threats, making it clear that whoever was behind it wanted revenge. The harassment moved beyond digital space when Jerry's credit card details were stolen. Fraudulent charges appeared on his statements, and he discovered that his stalker had changed his financial information. He reported it, but without a formal complaint, his internet provider refused to help. His wife left his daughter Noelle with him for a few days. However, Jerry was all engrossed in figuring out who the stalker was. The situation took a darker turn when Jerry found a message scrawled on his car. "I'm not finished with you." Jerry's paranoia deepened when his daughter Noelle was nearly abducted. A woman in dark sunglasses approached her, claiming to be a friend of Jerry's and offering to take her home. Terrified, Jerry kept his daughter locked inside for the remainder of her visit. The stalker taunted him, boasting about how easy it was to get close to his child. He started suspecting all the ladies who were cozy with him. He was being watched, and the perpetrator was close. His stalker teased him, hinting that they could be anyone, someone he saw daily, someone invisible in his routine, or someone he never suspected. At present, a woman knocked on his door. Jerry looked out. He was sure that it was the stalker. When the lady asked if Jerry was a registered voter, he lost control, violently attacking her, believing her to be the one behind his torment. He strangled her in his fit of paranoia. Meanwhile, Jerry's wife was worried that he wasn't answering his calls. She went to Noelle's room and asked her. Noelle sat at her computer, typing an email to her father. She was Miel, Jerry's stalker. She calmly stated that she didn't know about Jerry. As she clicked send, the screen flashed a disturbing message. She was still out there, and Jerry couldn't get rid of her. The Lotus Shoes by John Kuramoto and John J. Muth, Guangzhou, China. During the Qing dynasty, a mother presented her young daughter with a beautiful box, encouraging her to open it. The girl, excited, asked if it was all for her. The mother assured her that she would receive another one like it later, but for now, she wanted to show her something more important. The girl admired her mother's shoes and asked if she could have feet like hers. The mother told a fairy tale, recalling how she once had feet like her daughter's, but prayed to the gods for smaller, delicate feet like her mother's. She received a box of sweets as an offering, and the next day, 2 fairies arrived to grant her wish. They brought a phoenix to bless her feet. However, in reality, the phoenixes were actually roosters. The elders slaughtered the roosters and used their blood in the ritual. Her feet were bound tightly, as the elders explained that the process softened her bones, allowing them to be reshaped. She continued the fairy tale, saying the fairies took a feather from the phoenix before it flew away, and then the magic began. She recalled the moment vividly as the fairies touched her toes, transforming them. The phoenix feathers became long silk ribbons that wrapped her feet into the ideal shape of a lotus bud. She was given her first pair of lotus shoes, which fit perfectly. When she stood, it felt as if she were floating. In reality, the process was excruciating. As a child, she had cried out, begging not to walk, but the elders forced her to do so. Glass shards were pressed into her soles to shape them further. She was told the gods must be pleased, and the pain would last a year. Over time, she learned etiquette, embroidery, and how to make her own lotus shoes. Eventually, she was given the perfect husband, rich and handsome. Even he had not seen her face, but chose her based on her feet. She reminisced about her youth, her beauty, and her love for her husband. At night, when they were together, he only kissed her deformed feet, fulfilling his fetish. Now, she passed the tradition to her daughter, reassuring her that the fairies would come for her as well. The girl, eager but uncertain, watched her parents leave, believing the magic was real. The Empress Dowager of China outlawed foot binding in 1902, but the practice persisted until the 1920s. Flinch Part 9, Mostly White by Bruce Jones and Dave Taylor. The city bustled with holiday shoppers as snow fell lightly over the crowded streets. Joanna Ordway and her young son Kenneth stood in line outside a department store, waiting to see Santa. Kenneth, impatient, whined about the wait, repeatedly shouting that he wanted to see Santa. Joanna, frustrated, tried to calm him while remembering that she still needed to buy a gift for Aunt Lucy, who had given them an odd but thoughtful present the previous year. Exasperated, she wished for a drink, as Kenneth demanded to be picked up to see the crowd ahead. After a long wait, they reached the front of the line. A grumpy elf informed Joanna that the cost to see Santa was $20. Shocked, she hesitated, explaining that she only had enough money for a gift. The elf remained firm. No money, no Santa. Kenneth erupted into a tantrum, screaming that she had promised. Joanna, caught between his outburst and her financial constraints, searched for alternatives. She spotted another attraction called Snow World for $10. Relieved, she rushed toward it. The employee enthusiastically described how it simulated real snow. Kenneth, excited, eagerly entered, but Joanna was told only children were allowed inside. She watched from a viewing window as he played joyfully in the artificial snow. An old woman named Gladys approached Joanna, asking for spare change. Joanna hesitated but seemed sympathetic. However, a police officer quickly intervened, recognizing Gladys as a frequent panhandler. He insisted she move along. Joanna, feeling sorry for her, allowed a brief conversation. Gladys reminisced about how she had once waited in the same Santa line with her own son, Gerald, 15 years ago. Curious, Joanna asked about Gerald. Gladys, her voice heavy with emotion, revealed that she had lost him that night. She described the chaos, how they had stood in line, waiting eagerly, only to be told she didn't have enough money to enter. In the confusion, someone had bumped into her, causing her last $10 bill to drop and get kicked around. She frantically chased it, but lost sight of Gerald in the process. By the time she retrieved the money, Gerald was gone. She searched desperately, believing he had entered Snow World. The staff refused to let her in, claiming it was for children only. Despite her pleas, they dismissed her concerns. Security intervened when she grew frantic, forcibly removing her from the store. The police offered little help. The next day, she returned, but Snow World world had mysteriously vanished, packed up overnight as if it had never existed. Joanna, horrified, listened as Gladys described how she had spent years searching for Gerald. Her husband, unable to forgive her, had left. She lost her home and her job, eventually ending up on the streets. Still, every Christmas, she returned to the same department store, hoping to find her son. Gladys recalled a moment when she had nearly died from illness. One night, while sleeping under a bridge, she dreamed of Snow World. In the dream, she saw Gerald playing, happier than he had ever been. She called out, but as the snow thickened, he vanished over a hill with another figure. She woke up in a hospital, diagnosed with tuberculosis, but she refused to leave the city, convinced her son was still out there. As she finished her story, Joanna's attention snapped back to reality. Kenneth was supposed to come out by then. Panic surged through her as she scanned the area. She ran toward the Snow World entrance, demanding to be let inside. Employees told her it was closing time. Frantic, she fought past them, screaming for her son. Snow swirled around her as she stepped inside. The artificial winter landscape stretched endlessly, feeling more real than it should have. She spotted tiny boot prints and rushed forward, calling Kenneth's name. The temperature dropped, and she realized the snow-blowing machine was on full blast. Looking outside through a window, she saw him. Kenneth stood holding Gladys's hand on the other side, inside Snow World, looking out at her. Joanna banged on the glass, screaming his name. He didn't respond. Snow piled around her feet as exhaustion crept in. She whispered to herself that she just needed to rest for a moment. As her body weakened, the snow engulfed her, and the storm continued to rage. The Harvester by Tom Metzger and Sean Phillips. The surgeon reflected on the organ donation checkbox on driver's licenses, something they once selected without hesitation. Working as an operating room nurse for 11 years, they had been part of an elite surgical team handling high-stakes procedures. Among their responsibilities was organ harvesting, removing lungs, arteries, pancreases, and even hearts. The work saved lives, but they ultimately left and never returned. One night, an alert came in about a young man shot by the police during a 7-Eleven robbery. He was declared brain dead, but had healthy lungs and a viable heart. Meanwhile, a wealthy stockbroker in Chicago had been on the waiting list for over a year, ready for a transplant. The police dismissed the young man as a repeat offender, calling him worthless. They rationalized that for once, he would serve a purpose. The surgical team kept him on a respirator, while hospital staff arranged consent with his next of kin. Once approval came through, the surgeon shut off the respirator. Unlike usual procedures, where the atmosphere in the operating room was light-hearted, there was silence. The heart was removed first, taking only 10 minutes, while other organs required more time. The team ensured the young man was brain dead. There was no pain response, but the boy breathed. There should have been no reaction to light, but his pupils dilated. The boy shouldn't have breathed once the machine was turned off, but he was. The boy was still alive, and his heart was being taken out. The surgeon deluded himself into thinking that even if the boy had lived, he would have been left in a vegetative state. He acknowledged a grim reality. While the young man's life had been labelled as worthless, his body had significant monetary value. Hospitals and doctors profited greatly from such procedures. With no turning back, the operation proceeded. No one questioned whether the young man could have been saved. They focused only on completing their task. The surgeon packed the heart for transport, ensuring it arrived safely in Chicago. The stockbroker's procedure was successful. After that night, the surgeon never returned to the hospital. The job, once seen as noble, had taken a toll, leaving them unable to continue. In an abandoned room, the organ case lay unattended. On it was a donor form, and it had no name on it. Sitter by Stephen T. Siegel and John Estes. Clyde lounged in his apartment at 10 o'clock, drinking and lost in thought when loud knocking interrupted his peace. He assumed it wasn't Claudia, his ex, and dismissed the idea of it being a delivery. When he opened the door, Kevin, an old friend, stood there, visibly nervous and desperate. Kevin insisted Clyde swear to help him, no questions asked. Hesitant, Clyde tried to understand what Kevin wanted, but Kevin grew frustrated, pushing his way inside and nearly dislocating Clyde's shoulder in his urgency. Kevin pleaded with Clyde to watch something for him, emphasizing the urgency. Clyde resisted, but ultimately agreed to help, just to get Kevin away. As Kevin rushed out, Clyde remarked on how fast he moved, comparing it to the time their friend Cyrus had bought Kevin a lap dance. The moment shifted to complete shock when Kevin returned at 10:05, holding a bound and unconscious woman, Kelly. He shoved her into Clyde's apartment, causing Clyde to drop his coffee mug in disbelief. Kevin avoided Clyde's questions, growing aggressive. He insisted that Kelly had only hit her head and that she was dead. Clyde panicked, wanting no part of it, but Kevin refused to listen. Instead, he blackmailed Clyde, bringing up some bad stuff Clyde had done at work, hinting he could turn him in if he refused to cooperate. He even taunted him with Clyde's ex, Claudia, twisting the truth to keep Clyde compliant. When Clyde tried to argue, Kevin subtly revealed a gun, making it clear there was no room for negotiation. Clyde reluctantly agreed to watch Kelly while Kevin figured things out. At 10:10, Clyde stared at Kelly's still body on his floor, realizing he had no choice but to call 911. The police arrived and didn't believe his story. They questioned why Kevin would bring her to him and why he agreed to watch a dead girl. Clyde fumbled for an answer, but his hesitation only made them more suspicious. The situation spiraled further out of control. At 10:12, Clyde hesitated before making the call. By 10:13, he stopped, trying to think things through. He replayed Kevin's words in his head, wait a couple of hours, get some cash, and figure things out. At 10:34, he went to the bathroom, trying to process everything. Doubt crept in as he imagined Kevin using that money to flee town, leaving him to take the blame. By 10:50, Clyde sat on the couch, eating, trying to calm himself. His paranoia mounted. His mind replayed Kevin's threats, his manipulations, and the realization that Kevin had been wearing gloves the entire time. The setup was obvious. Kevin planned to pin everything on him. He panicked, trying to think of a place to hide Kelly's body, fearing that the smell of decomposition would eventually alert someone. At 11:15, he frantically thought about where to stash Kelly's body before someone noticed. At 11:34, the phone sat untouched. At 11:47, knocking at the door startled him again. Thinking it was FedEx, he opened the door. Instead, Kevin returned. Clyde, relieved for a moment, let him in. Kevin excitedly announced that he had taken care of things, paid someone off, and could escape. Clyde, however, had already called the cops. Kevin realized what Clyde had done and flew into a rage, accusing him of betrayal. At 11:44, the confrontation escalated. Clyde shouted that Kevin had killed someone, but Kevin insisted Clyde was just as guilty. Overcome with panic and paranoia, Kevin turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. Blood splattered. Time seemed to freeze, and Kelly suddenly gasped awake, revealing she had only blacked out. At 12:45, the police arrived just after Kevin's suicide. They confirmed Kelly had only suffered a concussion and had never been dead. Clyde stood among the chaos, his mind racing. If he had checked Kelly's pulse earlier, Kevin wouldn't have shot himself. At 12:59, the police cleared Clyde, but he knew the truth. Kevin was right. He was just as guilty. Flinch Part 10, Last Call, by Brian Azzarello and Danijel Zizelj. A man stood outside a bar, speaking on a payphone to someone at home. He reassured them that nothing was happening and that he would have just one more drink before heading back. As he hung up, his eyes lingered on some graffiti carved into the payphone. For a good time, call Lisa, 552212. Intrigued and slightly drunk, he dialed the number. A sultry voice answered, identifying herself as Lisa. Nervous, the man hesitated, stumbling over his words, but Lisa's voice was smooth and seductive. She complimented his voice, calling it sexy and velvety, then pressed him with provocative questions, asking if he was touching himself while talking to her. Embarrassed but hooked, he played along. Lisa guided the conversation into explicit territory, making him more comfortable. He admitted he was at a bar, surrounded by women, but Lisa scoffed, telling him none of them could excite him the way she could. She made him imagine her presence, whispering that she wished she could kiss him through the phone. As the man got lost in the fantasy, a furious voice suddenly interrupted. A man on the other end, presumably Lisa's husband, demanded to know who he was. Panic set in as Lisa pleaded in the background, saying her husband was hurting her. The stranger shouted threats, accusing the man of seducing his wife. Then, the sounds of violence echoed through the receiver. Lisa's screams, the husband hitting her, shattering glass. The caller desperately begged him to stop. Suddenly, Suddenly, there was a gunshot and the line went dead. He stood frozen, gripping the receiver. Moments later, the phone rang again. Trembling, he picked up. The husband's voice returned, eerily calm. He confessed he had shot Lisa in the mouth and asked if she was dead. He seemed lost, wondering why she had never been satisfied, why she had loved someone else. He demanded to know the caller's secret, what made women love him. As the man on the phone broke down, the caller stood in silence, overwhelmed. He left the payphone behind, tears streaming down his face. Later, someone else took out a coin to make a call. In the Pink by Ken Rothstein and Fran Terran. The man had been on the run from law enforcement, facing racketeering charges tied to the porn industry. He arrived in Los Angeles while his father hid in Miami and his brother in Chicago, all evading the authorities. His destination was Pinky's house, a man eager to gain favor with his father. Pinky finally had a chance to prove his loyalty by offering shelter. Upon arrival, an odd atmosphere surrounded the place. Pinky, an eccentric and overly curious man, immediately bombarded him with questions about the family's business, how much money they earned, how they handled finances, and how they avoided getting caught. The constant questioning made him uneasy. Suspicion crept in that Pinky might be an informant. A week passed, and Pinky remained relentless with his inquiries while obsessively painting his walls in different shades of pink. Something felt wrong. His host's behavior seemed off, and the questioning never stopped. The unease grew, leading him to question what Pinky really did for a living. One day, after Pinky left to run errands, the man decided to snoop around. He discovered stacks of videotapes, each labelled with dates. Playing one, he uncovered disturbing homemade pornography. Pinky wasn't just collecting, he was actively involved. The footage revealed him engaging in sex on camera before strangling and killing his partner. The lifeless woman's body was hidden under the bed. It wasn't just pornography, Pinky was making snuff films. Horrified, he lifted the bedsheet, finding a pale corpse beneath it. The realization hit hard. The walls weren't just painted pink, they were covered in the blood of his victims. A presence loomed behind him. Turning, he saw Pinky, gun in one hand, camera in the other. The smirk on his face remained as the camera recorded. Pinky explained that the walls had started turning brown from oxidation, so he covered the stains with pink paint. With a twisted grin, Pinky raised his gun and asked, "Ready for your close-up?" The man screamed. The Mule by Tony Bedard and David Lloyd. Carmen recounted how she found herself trapped in a desperate situation. Her friend Conchi had hesitated before arranging a meeting with the traffickers, deeply conflicted about involving her. Conchi had been a close friend and godmother to Carmen's son Javi. She understood the gravity of the situation, but ultimately made the call and provided Carmen with an address. Overwhelmed by guilt, she vomited after doing so. Carmen soon found herself in the hands of drug traffickers, men who dealt in the export of their country's illicit crop. These criminals regularly hired couriers, often forcing them to smuggle drugs inside their bodies. Conchi had warned her about the horrifying methods. Some swallowed drug-filled condoms, while others had them inserted in even more invasive ways. Carmen knew the risks, but she had no other means to earn the money she needed to save Javi. She was willing to take the chance. At first, the traffickers acted pleasant, but their demeanour quickly hardened. They decided she was the right fit for a particular job. Handing her flight details, they informed her she was booked on a 4:30 flight to New Orleans. Once there, she would take a bus to a motel where their partners would retrieve the package and pay her before sending her home. They had already secured a round-trip ticket. They made it clear they knew about Javi's heart condition and used it as leverage to ensure she complied. That same morning, a doctor had told Carmen about a supposedly routine operation that could save Javi. Without insurance or savings, she had no way to afford it. When she asked about the extra plane ticket, the traffickers revealed it was for the baby. It was only later that she understood the horror of what they meant. The baby was a dead infant, its body stuffed with drugs and its stomach sewn shut. Carmen was expected to strap it to her chest and pretend it was her own child. When she hesitated, the men scolded her, warning her to handle it properly. At the airport, she carried the lifeless weight, each step feeling like a burden on her soul. When When a customs officer approached, she almost wanted to be caught. Yet, inexplicably, the baby acted as a shield, and she passed through without suspicion. On the plane, she faced another ordeal. A flight attendant cooed over the supposed child, asking its age, making Carmen panic over how to respond. Another, Laurie, spoke in a disturbingly cheerful tone, offering a blanket and commenting on how quiet the baby was. Carmen began to feel as though Laurie suspected something was wrong. The woman's fake smile unsettled her. Laurie's persistence eventually broke Carmen. Unable to handle the pressure, she muttered in defeat, "You win." Suddenly, the impossible happened. The baby wailed. Carmen recoiled, staring down in horror as the infant's dried lips scraped against her nipples. Despite her shock, she forced herself to smile and reassure Laurie that everything was fine. The attendant called the baby good for settling down. Carmen's guilt and paranoia mounted. Her mind raced with doubt. Was this what Javi would have wanted? The voices in her head urged her to confess before it was too late, but fear kept her silent. Upon arrival, she reached the motel, paranoia consuming her. Why hadn't anyone stopped her? Were the traffickers even going to let her go after this? She searched the room for something she could use as a weapon, fearing for her life. Her thoughts spiraled, convincing her that the drugs inside the infant were tainted, a poisoned batch that would kill people if she delivered them. Her survival instinct took over. A voice in her head begged her to stop, but she ignored it. She grabbed a broken bottle and, in a fit of madness, stabbed the infant repeatedly until its stitches tore open. Fueled by desperation, she screamed that she would kill everyone in the city for her son. The infant was dead again. When the traffickers arrived, she braced for the worst. Instead, they laughed, high-fiving each other. Apparently, couriers who transported infants always had breakdowns. Her suffering was meaningless to them. The job was done. Later, Carmen sat across from her ex-husband Roberto, recounting what she had endured. Roberto expressed regret, claiming he had no idea what she had gone through. She rejected his sympathy. Javi had finally received his surgery and was even trying out for the soccer team. Roberto argued that a boy needed his father, but Carmen coldly reminded him that Javi had needed him 4 years ago. Now it was too late. No matter how much money he had, she had traded her soul for Javi's life. It was a price she would never forget. Flinch, Part 11. Red Romance by John R. Lansdale and Bruce Timm. Billy Ruck, a seasoned hitman, spent his nights working without much excitement. One night, while carrying out another routine kill, he came across a woman who caught his interest. She was a striking young prostitute who exuded confidence and danger. As he observed, she lured in a client and led him into a secluded alley. The man propositioned her, and she responded playfully. But when he reached for his money, she struck. With swift precision, she pulled out a knife and slashed his throat. Billy watched in admiration as the man gasped for air, blood gushing from his wound. She moved with an effortless grace, exuding a thrill that fascinated him. As the man collapsed, she crouched beside him, enjoying his suffering. Billy followed her home, captivated. He watched her apartment from the shadows, lingering there all night and through the following day, waiting for the right moment. When night fell again, he approached. The two finally spoke when Billy caught her in action, stabbing a man in an alley. Impressed, he introduced himself, calling her an artist. She smirked, amused by his admiration, and teased him, refusing to give her name until he proved himself. She demonstrated her skills again, approaching a pair of unsuspecting young men. Instead of targeting them, she effortlessly pocketed their cash without them noticing. Billy was enthralled. She revealed her name as Patty Champ. Unlike others, she wasn't interested in money. She was drawn to style, and Billy had it. Together, they embarked on a spree of crime and violence, dancing in the chaos. Mugging and murder became their entertainment. After every crime, they had made love, covered in the victim's blood. But over time, even that wasn't enough. As boredom settled in, Billy approached a shady man in a diner. He wanted something different. He explained that he loved Patty, but he also wanted her to suffer. The hitman agreed, for a price. That night, the hitman broke into their apartment as part of the act. He took Patty by force, stripped her, and tied her to the bed. Billy kept watching. The hitman took out a wrench and hit Billy on the head, drawing blood. He beat both of them badly. They bled profusely. Patty and Billy smirked at each other, realizing they had both hired the same man for the act. They were too much alike. Instead of fear, they reveled in the shared thrill. Laughing, Patty encouraged the hitman as he pulled out Billy's teeth. Then Billy watched with passion as the hitman sliced Patty up with a blade. As they lay bleeding, The hitman flipped a coin to decide who would go first. When Patty won, she declared her love for Billy and screamed in enthusiasm. The hitman drove a hammer through her skull. Billy stared at Patty's dead body with love. Billy, enthralled by the spectacle, took his turn. With a hammer in hand, the hitman delivered the final blow. As the night ended, the hitman took a shower and left. Billy and Patty lay together in the bed, soaked in blood and satisfied in death. Emergent by John Rossum and Cliff Wu Chiang. The man reflected on his past, acknowledging that everything he touched became poison. He had been clean for 7.5 years, but the weight of his sins remained. He had been a violent drunk, institutionalized 3 times without success. He barely remembered the violence he committed, almost as if it had been someone else. The act that sobered him was beating his wife to death with an empty gin bottle, though the true wake-up call had been the long prison sentence that followed. Prison had forced him to go cold turkey, but his body had already suffered irreparable damage. Surprisingly, it wasn't his liver that failed, but both of his kidneys. As a convicted murderer, he stood no chance of getting an organ transplant. Instead, he became part of a state-run medical experiment where prisoners could volunteer in exchange for sentence reductions. A bioresearch company tested a stem cell theory on him, hoping the body could regenerate its own organs. The procedure worked better than expected, giving him kidneys that functioned even more efficiently than the originals. After being released, he found a job, a cheap apartment, and a woman named Sally who stayed with him despite knowing his past. Life seemed manageable until strange things began to happen. He developed new organs that no one had seen before, designed to filter toxins from his body. A dog he touched convulsed and died. When he grabbed a man's arm on the street, toxins seeped from his skin, dissolving the man's flesh. Fear kept him from telling Sally. He wanted to be better for her, but the poison in his body made it impossible. Eventually, she left. Isolated and desperate, he sought escape through alcohol and drugs, trying to destroy his unnatural kidneys, but they endured. His body continued sweating out toxins, harming everything around him. Accepting that he had failed, he considered destroying other organs in his body, hoping to finally end what he had become. Pre-Packed by Ian Carney and Dave Taylor. A man named Lawrence Kehoe spent his Friday night failing at romantic encounters. He struggled through awkward conversations, realizing his reputation often preceded him. Women quickly lost interest, leaving him embarrassed. His self-esteem took another hit when someone referred to him as having a contraceptive personality, implying he repelled women entirely. The next morning, he avoided work and went shopping. He found himself in a store filled with foreign products and was drawn to a peculiar item labelled Boil in the Bag Girlfriend. After some deliberation, he selected Demure Brunette over other varieties like Tetchy Redhead. At home, he followed the package instructions. He removed the sealed sack, noting its eerie texture, and placed it in the bathtub, pouring boiling water over it. As he waited, he noticed sudden movement. To his horror, the sack burst open, revealing a pale, bald, human-like figure. It sat up, its mouth dripping dark liquid. Despite the grotesque introduction, the package promised enjoyment. The creature identified itself as his girlfriend. Lawrence, still in shock, tried to compose himself. The figure assured him it would develop more over time, but insisted there would be no immediate sex. It promised to be fully functional by tomorrow. The next day, she exhibited more human traits, cooking breakfast and speaking in broken English. She asked Lawrence for money so she could shop and cook. She insisted she needed to sleep while he worked to complete her transformation. She exhibited her body and told Lawrence that she would be ready by night. At the office, Lawrence thought that it was not just sex that he wanted from his girlfriend. He also needed friendship and understanding. So he ran back home. When Lawrence returned home, she was gone, along with his TV and valuables. He discovered a boil-in-the-bag boyfriend package left behind. Her girlfriend now had a new boyfriend. Accepting his loser fate, he wandered the streets, seeing women with other men buying the boil-in-the-bags. In a moment of bitter humour, he found solace in realising he at least had an ex-girlfriend now. Flinch Part 12. Watching You by Bruce Jones and Frank Quitely. Pete reminisced about his obsession with Lila, a girl he had admired since childhood. His earliest memories of her went back to elementary school, where he first saw her and became enamoured. However, his introduction to Lila was interrupted by Mick Rauscher, a school bully. Mick asserted dominance over Pete, making it clear that Lila was his girl, though that wasn't exactly true. Despite Mick's claim, Pete and Lila formed an inseparable bond. God, but only in Pete's dreams. As they grew older, Pete's love for Lila deepened. He watched her, idealized her, and in his mind, she became something unattainable. Mick remained a constant force in their lives, often overshadowing Pete. A pivotal moment came when Pete saw Lila and Mick in a canoe on a lake. When the boat tipped over, Mick struggled in the water. He couldn't swim. Pete, who could, jumped in and saved Lila first, experiencing the thrill of physical closeness with her for the first time. Mick hugged him for his bravery and became his best friend. Their friendship continued through school and into adulthood. Mick remained Pete's best friend, sharing everything with him except Lila. As the years passed, Mick joined the army before the Gulf War, while Pete watched from the sidelines, feeling left behind. When Mick returned, he was wounded, confined to a wheelchair, and emotionally broken. Pete, who had always been the passive observer, was now forced into an uncomfortable role. Mick feared losing Lila and, in desperation, asked Pete for an unimaginable favour: to sleep with her, to keep her happy. Though Pete was hesitant, Mick insisted, making it clear he trusted no one else. Lila, seemingly resigned, agreed, but only under the condition that Mick watched. Pete was overwhelmed by the situation, but went through with it, believing he was fulfilling his lifelong fantasy. Yet, the experience left him hollow, filled with conflicting emotions: love for Lila, hatred for Mick, and disgust with himself. His life spiraled after that. He lost his job, relationships, and sense of self. He became an empty shell, trapped in an arrangement where Mick, using his disability pension, invited Pete to move in, making their twisted dynamic permanent. Eventually, Pete couldn't take it anymore. He professed his love to Lila, offering to take her away from Mick and the toxic situation. Lila refused, explaining that Mick needed her and she couldn't leave. Devastated, Pete fell into a downward spiral, contemplating suicide. Before going through with it, he went to a bar, only to see Mick walking. Mick went out with a girl from the club and made love to her, while Pete watched. The realization that Mick had been faking his condition sent Pete into a violent rage. He followed Mick, hid in his car, and ambushed him with a gun, demanding answers. Mick tried to explain, claiming Lila had helped him learn to walk again, and their dynamic had become an addiction, one they both couldn't break. They liked to see each other making love to others. Pete, enraged by the betrayal, forced Mick at gunpoint to drive, his anger boiling over. As the confrontation escalated, the car veered off the road. Pete regained some awareness in a hospital, completely paralysed but able to see and hear. Doctors informed Mick and Lila that Pete wouldn't last long and needed caretakers. Mick reassured Pete, promising everything would be fine, while Lila swore they would take care of him. As they brought Pete home, he reflected on his lifelong obsession with Lila, fixating on her lips, nose, and eyes. He recalled the moments he had spent watching her, realising he had become trapped in the same powerless state Mick once had. Lila lay beside him, holding his hand, as Mick made love to her. The vicious cycle continued. Tin God by John Arcudi and Ryan Sook. A man ran frantically through a graveyard, pondering why he had come. He thought he must be losing his mind, but also knew deep down that he should have expected what he was about to see. As he moved through the graves, he realized that if someone were to return, this would be the first place they'd come. His suspicions were confirmed when he saw a decayed corpse, a zombified woman, rising near a tombstone. Panicked, he ran, knowing there was no stopping what was coming for him. He prayed, despite once being an atheist, recalling how just months ago he had rejected the idea of God. Now, fear gripped him as he felt judgment closing in. He remembered how he had unearthed a corpse, and through alchemy and science, brought it back to life. He spat on God's face. Back in the graveyard, the undead woman chased him relentlessly. He knew she was stronger and faster, and he was running on pure adrenaline. Desperate for a way out, he considered lying down and letting it all end. He lay still inside a grave, but the zombie spotted him. As the zombie reached out, the man grabbed its hand and called her Gail. She was his wife. As he pulled her into the shallow grave, rage overtook him. He lashed out, calling her a bitch, furious that she had returned to undo everything he had done. He screamed at her, insisting she wasn't dead, that she couldn't be. As he struck her, he vowed to restore her beauty, to make things the way they were before, believing that then she would understand everything he had ever done. His final words revealed the truth. He did it all because he loved her. Gail's grotesque skeletal face stared at him with lifeless eyes, as if a helpless human was praying to a nameless god. Mondays by Scott Cunningham and Essard Ribbick. Roger Templeton, the corporate director of an unknown company, had a strict routine. He received a list before lunch, passed it to Martin, and then left for his break. However, on this particular day, the list arrived late. He instructed Martin, a long-time yet dim-witted employee, to make 6 copies, one for each person on the list and one for security. Martin, grinning as always, took the list and left to complete the task. He gave it to the people whose names were on the list. Roger noted how he and Martin had been in the company for a long time, with Martin always confined to the copy room. Today, however, lunch was no longer an option. As he sat in the restroom, he speculated that by 4:30, Martin must have finished the copies. He ensured the list was distributed discreetly, mixed with the rest of the office mail. Holding off the afternoon mail until the list was sent, he then went to the restroom. Roger thought about Bob, an employee he actually liked. Bob had noticed something odd. The list was usually sent at the beginning of the week, and the delay had raised suspicion. Bob confronted him in the hallway. Bob, apologetic but desperate, mentioned declining division sales, trying to justify his performance. Roger knew this was a common situation across departments. Bob commented on Roger's input in adding the names in the list, making Roger uncomfortable. His voice wavered, making Roger nervous. Bob sadly looked at his family's framed picture. The security officer confirmed it was okay to take the picture with him. Roger left for the washroom, reflecting that he genuinely liked Bob, but business was business. As Roger washed his hands, he regretted not saying something to Bob. Meanwhile, chaos erupted outside. The security officer restrained a woman in distress, apologizing profusely. Roger observed the commotion and thought about sending a memo about it. He saw the reality. The list should always go out before lunch. He reminisced about the first time he saw his office view, back when it belonged to someone else, Jensen. Jensen had once commented that the office had the best view in middle management, though he had added something unsettling. The windows couldn't be opened. If someone wanted to jump, they'd have to break the glass. As Roger stood near the window, lost in thought, a janitor interrupted. Surprised, he was still there. The office was dark. Everyone had already left. Snapping out of it, Roger responded vaguely before deciding it was time for him to leave too. Approaching the elevator, he saw blood smeared on the doors. When they opened, the car was filled with stacked, lifeless bodies. Everyone in the list had been eliminated. The security officer calmly told him he'd have to wait for the next one. Roger stood in silence, his expression blank. As the doors shut, he sighed internally, thinking, God, I hate Mondays. Flinch Part 13. Brer Hoodoo by Joe R. Lansdale and Temmie Truman. Brer Bear told a tale of Brer Hare, a cunning trickster with an ambition that took him deep into the woods, further than Brer Bear himself would dare go. Brer Hare sought out a fabled crossroads where, at midnight under a full moon, one could meet the devil and receive anything they desired, for a price. The trick was to bring a drink and offer it to the devil, claiming one's soul in exchange. Brer Hare, intrigued and eager for greatness, took the journey. At the crossroads, the devil appeared, a grinning, shadowy figure in a red suit and bowler hat. Brer Hare, nervous but determined, offered his whiskey. The devil, amused, drank it, remarking on its weakness. Brer Hare confirmed he was indeed speaking to the devil and made his request, to play the guitar better than anyone alive. The devil was more than willing to grant it, but a deal required a signature, written in pain. As soon as Brer Hare strummed the enchanted guitar, the strings cut into his fingers, sealing the contract in blood. The transformation was immediate. Brer Hare played like a god, his fingers moving faster than the eye could follow. Devil vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving Brer Hare with his newfound power. He quickly put it to use, dazzling crowds and charming women. His music was so enchanting that dresses lifted, drawers dropped, and the world fell at his feet. Life was good, and he revelled in it, but with fame came arrogance. In a bar, as he flaunted his talent, someone claimed there was a guitarist even better. Brer Hare, incensed, demanded to know who. The name was Brer Fox. The crowd laughed at Brer Hare's sudden hesitation, mocking his bluster. Brer Fox was a legend, and the challenge was undeniable. On stage, Brer Hare insulted Brer Fox, claiming he couldn't even speak, let alone play. But as soon as Brer Fox touched his guitar, the room went silent. His music was beyond anything the crowd had ever heard. Brer Hare knew he had been beaten. Furious and desperate, he lashed out, smashing his guitar over Brer Fox's head. The room erupted into chaos as Brer Fox died. The crowd turned on Brer Hare, calling him a murderer. Brer Hare fled into the night, pursued by the law. He sought refuge in the briar patch, confident it would protect him, but the law was waiting. They gunned him down. His final words, a realization. He had been played. As he lay dying, the devil reappeared, laughing. As Brer Hare was lifted and roasted in fire, the devil revealed the catch. He had given Brer Hare exactly what he asked for. He was best, but only with his guitar. But Brer Fox was best in his as well as anyone else's guitar. Brer Bear closed his story with a moral as he chewed the remains of Brer Hare. Be careful what you wish for, because sometimes it comes back to bite you in the ass. The Story of a Nut Gone Bad by Roger Langride. An old man sat on a porch, talking to his grandson about life. The grandson asked what life is like, prompting the old man to say that life is like waiting for a bus. When questioned why, he decides to illustrate with a story about a man named Dr. Bizarre. Dr. Bizarre was a small, unhappy man with big ambitions. He was sitting in a bank, waiting for a loan, along with various people, an old woman needing money for a wedding trip, a man requesting cash for his pet's glasses, and another couple wanting a mortgage. Meanwhile, Dr. Bizarre had more sinister plans. He needed money to complete his death ray to wipe out the human race. When asked about his purpose, he loudly proclaimed his goal of mass murder, which startled everyone. The bank clerk dismissed his application as ridiculous, prompting Bizarre to mutter about his family legacy of murderers. He boasted about his father, a famous killer, but his attempts to follow in his footsteps had been lackluster. He recounted his failures, like trying to terrorize a classroom of schoolgirls with his laugh or attempting to stab a teacher with a library card. Despite his aspirations, he had never successfully killed anyone. Realizing how unaccomplished he was, Dr. Bizarre defended himself, saying murder was competitive now, requiring intelligence and contacts. He explained that he tried networking at children's parties to find wealthy clients who might pay for assassinations. However, his rambling only made the listeners more amused. Eventually, the bank manager called for the person whose dog needed glasses, dismissing Bizarre. After the loan of the pet's owner was approved, Bizarre went before the loan officer. The officer was unimpressed by his ambitions and deemed him unqualified for a loan. Bizarre tried justifying his career choice by recounting his father's last words, but the manager coldly dismissed him, advising him to come back when he was successful. The rejection left Bizarre devastated. As he sulked outside, he found the pet dog. He showed pity towards the dog as it was abandoned by its owner. Frustrated, Bizarre spiraled into an enraged rant about being mistreated, claiming he would storm back inside, kill the manager, and prove himself. He fantasized about a violent revenge, strangling the dog anxiously. In the next moment, the old lady attacked him and bashed him with a baseball bat. They brutally murdered him. The others laughed over the mess the old lady had made. They took out chainsaws and bags and casually planned to dispose of him. As the old man concluded his tale, the grandson found the whole thing absurd, questioning what it had to do with waiting for a bus. The old man cryptically, "You can wait a lifetime waiting for a murderer to arrive, and then life throws 3 at you." The grandson, frustrated, remarked that her mother planned to put the man in an old age home. The Shaft by Brian Azzarello and Javier Pulido. One kid lit a firecracker while another struggled to hold a black cat still. They held it strongly and shoved the firecracker up its backside. The cat panicked, scratched one of them and escaped, but the firecracker exploded midway, leaving it dazed and in agony. It staggered towards a nearby facility. The boys debated whether to finish it off, with one suggesting putting it out of its misery. Later, the kids climbed over a fence into a restricted construction site despite a no trespassing sign warning about armed security. They argued, and tensions flared as they blamed each other. As they searched for the injured cat, one suggested bashing its head in and moving on to buying beer, then going into the woods and chill. Another rejected the idea, knowing the jocks would be there and wanting to avoid the crowd. As they explored the construction site, they were caught by a security guard and a thug. They were filling up cement from a mixer into a hole in the ground. Fleckner, the guard, pulled a gun at them, demanding a reason not to shoot. The thug dismissed the threat, pointing out they were just kids, but Fleckner remained aggressive, accusing them of trespassing and planning to cause trouble. One kid denied it, but the thug found the remnants of their firecracker firecracker. Fleckner warned them that if they returned, their heads would be the ones blown up. Right then, the thugs spotted the cat, now barely alive. He showed it to Fleckner. Furious, Fleckner berated them for torturing a defenseless animal, comparing it to harming someone's pet. He called them sickos and, along with the thug, decided to punish them. They made the boys drop their pants and shoved the firecrackers up their backside and lit them on fire. As the firecrackers burst, the boys panicked and tried to flee. In their frantic escape, they tripped while pulling up their pants, falling down a deep shaft. Fleckner and the thug looked down, estimating the depth of the fall as about 3 stories. They joked about a high school football game and casually discussed a player. The thug picked up the dead cat and said, "Kids these days, sick bastards." He dumped the dead cat into the hole in the ground. At the bottom lay a bound and bruised man. They were burying him alive under cement. Fleckner, holding a shovel, smirked and said, "Tell me about it." Flinch Part 14, Resolve, by Bruce Jones and Bernie Wrightson. At precisely midnight on a stormy Monday, a woman in a nightgown heard knocking at her door. A dishevelled man, Richard Parks, stood outside, explaining that he had an accident after his car crashed into a tree down the hill. He asked to use her phone, but she told him she had none. Instead, she invited him in to rest and dry himself. Inside, Richard observed the dimly lit, old-fashioned house and remarked on the grand but outdated architecture. The woman introduced herself as Megan. Richard apologized for intruding so late, but she replied that she had been expecting him. Confused, he asked what she meant, but she only pointed out the road, mentioning that the dangerous curve had caused other accidents before. Meanwhile, outside, something stirred in the nearby graveyard. Richard noticed an odd scent in the house and mentioned incense. Megan responded that she preferred it over the smell of decay. She offered him a robe, indicating it had belonged to her father. Richard spotted a portrait of a stern-looking man whom Megan identified as her late father, the Great Lombardi, a famous master of mystic sciences. She compared him to Houdini, explaining that he sought to unlock the secrets of the mind through hypnosis. Meanwhile, in the cemetery, a corpse clawed its way out of the earth. Megan led Richard to her father's library, filled with old books detailing Lombardi's research. She lamented how time had yellowed the pages, just as beauty fades. She explained that her father's obsession with hypnosis wasn't just about greatness, it was about control. As Richard moved closer to her, she resisted, claiming she was trying to be a good girl. However, she also admitted she found him irresistible. Richard grew increasingly aggressive, accusing her of seducing him. Megan pleaded, but Richard overpowered her, insisting that she wanted him too. As they struggled, she revealed that her father had believed the dead could communicate with the living, and his obsession had driven him to madness. Outside, the decayed corpse of Lombardi lurched toward the house. Megan, trapped between fear and desire, cried that Richard was destroying her resolve. He ignored her protests, insisting that she had been tempting him all along. Their struggle escalated to passion, and just as Richard overpowered her, the corpse burst through the window. Richard recoiled in horror as Megan greeted the undead figure, calling it her father. She urged Richard not to stop, saying her father wanted to join them. The zombie of Lombardi climbed onto the bed, reaching toward Richard, who screamed in terror. Megan's face contorted, revealing a decayed, monstrous visage as she demanded that he love her. Richard awoke, gasping in horror. He initially thought it was a nightmare, but Megan was still beside him, urging him to return to bed. He tried to flee, realizing the house was not normal, but Megan explained that hypnosis required constant focus. Richard looked into the mirror, and all he could see was a rotten corpse. Panicked, Richard ran outside, convinced that Megan had drugged him, but when he reached his car, he found it rusted and ancient, as if it had been there for years. His hands and face began to wither, and he realized he had been trapped in the same cycle before. Megan confirmed it, gleefully stating that she had wanted him back, just as she had wanted her father. Richard stumbled to the graveyard, seeing his own tombstone, Richard Parks, 1944 to 1978. Megan buried him in his grave again. As she walked away, Megan declared that her father's teachings carried beyond the grave. As the clock struck midnight again, another knock sounded at her door, continuing the cycle. Grave Wisdom by Ted McKeever. The narrator, Thomas Fosado Lahumani, recounted his lifelong obsession with death, questioning what happens when one dies. As a child, he experienced Dia de los Muertos in Mexico, where death was celebrated with colourful festivities. Watching his friend Christian atop a skeletal float, he imagined himself as a skeleton. But that day, death manifested in a different, horrifying way. Christian suffered a fatal accident, falling and breaking his neck. The sound of it and the vacant look in his eyes haunted Thomas. He stood over Christian's small casket, overcome with questions that would define his life. He became consumed with finding answers about life and death, dedicating himself to understanding the mysteries of the soul. Thomas excelled in medical school, focusing on cloning and DNA research. His obsession with the final moments of life drove him deeper into pathology. He spent years researching the separation of the self, whether the soul resided in the head or the body. He questioned what Christian might have thought as he died, whether he realized his head was severed from his body. This relentless pursuit of knowledge led him to an extreme experiment. After years of research, Thomas succeeded in bringing Christian back to life. However, the boy was not the same. He was a silent, lifeless shell, existing without emotion or soul. Thomas realized he had only reanimated a body, not restored a person. Christian, the boy he knew, was gone. Desperate to evoke some response, Thomas exposed Christian to other children, hoping familiarity would awaken something within him. But there was nothing. Science had only built a shell, not rekindled a soul. Then, after years of silence, Christian spoke. He called Thomas by name and told him he had always known the answer to his questions. Christian invited Thomas to see the truth. In desperation, Thomas asked if it was the head or body that contained the soul. Christian reached for a sword and, in an instant, decapitated Thomas. As his severed head hit the ground, Thomas realized the truth of death, its raw, brutal finality. Fleeting thoughts filled his fading consciousness. His self was but held by the cycle of sufferings that people call life. But what he experienced in death was his intangible soul. Thomas reflected on his own emptiness. He had brought Christian to life, making him soulless and alone. He wandered the world as a hollow vessel, forever disconnected. His final thoughts lingered. He would apologize to Christian, but he was already dead. If Wishes Had Wings by Darko Macan and Tim Levins. Mike Haspiel was getting ready to leave his apartment when the doorbell rang. Annoyed, he opened the door to find an attractive woman in a revealing outfit. Initially dismissing her as a salesperson, he was caught off guard when she called him by name and declared that she needed him. The next moment, they were in bed together, his clothes scattered across the floor. The next morning, Mike hurried into a cab, tipping the driver generously before rushing into his office. Expecting to see his assistant Sondra, he was surprised to find a new woman in her place, who eagerly introduced herself and insisted she could handle the job. Overwhelmed, Mike tried to brush her off, but she grew more insistent, tugging at his shirt, causing him to stumble backward. In his office, his boss Dean impatiently asked about the Nevins file, but before Mike could respond, Dean handed him a new assignment, introducing him to Barb and Bee, two striking blonde women. They wasted no time getting close, one straddling him while the other leaned in suggestively. Dean encouraged him to enjoy himself, assuring him that he wouldn't get opportunities like this often. Later, Mike, looking exhausted, sat in a taxi. The driver jokingly remarked on his rough day, but before Mike could respond, a gun-wielding woman hijacked the cab. She forced the driver out and turned the weapon on Mike, demanding more than just his wallet. Later, wandering the streets in a disheveled state, he was approached by a seemingly kind nun offering comfort. However, she quickly turned seductive, leaving Mike in horror. He screamed as reality faded. The final scene revealed that Mike was now in a mental institution. The doctor assured him there was no change in Mike's condition. His friend, who had entered him in an extreme game show that turned his life into a pornographic nightmare, felt guilty. The doctor knew the name of the show, The Flying Pig, the one that gives wings to your wishes. But the doctor said that it was partly the problem, as Mike had become an unwilling celebrity. Meanwhile, a lady inmate started cuddling Mike. A nurse pushed her away and touched Mike suggestively while undressing herself. Mike's ordeal was far from over. Flinch Part 15, A Night to Forget by Paul Jenkins and the Panda Bros. Aboard a cruise ship Sea Princess, a woman named Cher, dressed in a white officer's uniform, engaged in a conversation with the ship's captain about the slogan of the cruise line. The captain commented on the freedom passengers enjoyed even in their old age. Nearby, a woman with long blonde hair watched the elderly passengers dancing and drinking, sarcastically remarking on their desperate attempts to appear young and single. people. She expressed her horror at aging like them and asked her companion to promise to end her life if she ever reached that point. Ted, her companion, questioned why she took the job as a cruise director if she despised the elderly so much. Cher reflected bitterly on her 3 years aboard the cruise, managing the social lives of elderly passengers instead of being where she truly wanted. She had spent years making sure guests didn't get into trouble, only to be left with an empty bank account, an occasional romance with a crew member, and persistent headaches. She lamented that she would probably end up on a similar cruise when she was old. Down in the crew area, tensions ran high among the officers. One of their own, Wally, had gotten drunk and passed out in the radio room, vomiting over crucial navigation equipment. This left the ship without proper communication or navigation. The captain, an old and stubborn man, insisted on continuing the journey, claiming he had memorized the route over 30 years. When the crew voiced concerns, he threatened them with the brig. A skeptical officer mentioned the Flying Dutchman, questioning whether anyone had ever heard of it. The conversation shifted to an old legend. 300 years prior, Captain Vanderdecken, a merchant captain, insisted on sailing through a dangerous storm despite his crew's protests. He had a timetable to keep, and he swore that if he didn't make it around the Cape, the devil could take him. He never reached his destination, and legend said he was doomed to sail forever. Cher found the story unsettling and oddly familiar, as if she had forgotten something important. Just then, an old sailor spotted something in the water. The captain dismissed his concerns, but through the fog, a ghostly ship began to appear. Suddenly, the Sea Princess veered off course and into eerie waters. The passengers panicked as ghostly voices of deceased elderly passengers rang out. Vanderdecken's cursed vessel, the Flying Dutchman, emerged from the mist, its captain glaring with wild, demonic eyes. The Sea Princess crashed violently, throwing people overboard. Chaos erupted, and skeletal figures climbed onto the ship, dragging crew and passengers into the water. Cher found herself caught in the catastrophe. As she witnessed the horror, a terrible realization dawned on her. Something she was forgetting. They were all already dead. A fisherman on another ship, the Eleanor, saw the phantom of the Sea Princess passing by in the night. One of them muttered that for a second he thought he had seen something, but then brushed it off. The ghostly cruise ship, it seemed, was doomed to sail the seas forever. Watchful by Lucius Shepard and Chris Weston. Crane and Sarah were engaged in an intense, voyeuristic dynamic. Crane directed Sarah as she positioned herself on a bed, ensuring that the camera angles were perfect. He complimented her, focusing on her physicality, while Sarah checked the close-up shots, confirming their clarity. Their relationship revolved around constant observation, and Sarah expressed a heightened sense of focus, as if she could feel every detail of herself. Crane admitted he had been watching her obsessively, scrutinizing her every movement, breath, and thought. Their past feelings for each other were hazy, reduced to memories without true emotional connection, except when he was actively watching. Sarah recalled hating Crane when their cycle of mutual surveillance began, suggesting a toxic, inescapable loop. They discussed how everyone around them was absorbed in watching others, detached from reality. Crane mentioned Jane, a woman who had been observing him long before privacy rights were abolished. Jane had seen strange things through her surveillance. Once, she observed a man in archaic clothing, surrounded by elaborate machinery, as if from another era. Another time, Jane fixated on a mysterious figure standing in a pitch-black room, illuminated only by a glowing doorway. Only seldom did the figure close the door. The figure's presence was unsettling, seeming human but fundamentally alien. Jane believed she was witnessing another reality, a place beyond comprehension, where observation itself shaped existence. As they talked, the war raged outside, fire and destruction everywhere. Crane described that the cosmos was watching itself in order to define itself and consume itself in the process. As Sarah prepared a drug, she described a cold sensation in her stomach, calling it centering. She danced seductively, declaring that the world was ending. Under the drug's influence, she experienced an overwhelming euphoria, comparing it to an extended climax. Crane watched, fixated as Sarah dissolved into the experience. Their conversation blurred between past and present, reality and memory. Crane described Sarah's appearance as both alluring and unnatural, her eyes gleaming as if detached from her body. As Sarah surrendered to the moment, Crane insisted he was feeling everything she was, as if he had transcended mere observation. They reminisced about their past intimacy, blending past desires with present control. Crane declared they were inhabiting both memory and reality at once, unlocking a deeper consciousness. Sarah reached an ecstatic peak and climaxed, her entire being consumed by the experience. In the final moments, Crane focused into Sarah's eyes, where he could see the strange man in the dark room, her existence seemingly unraveling. The man closed the door that day. Whatever he was the observer of the watcher. Crane called it perfect. The perspective then shifted to Jane, watching Crane on a screen. The cycle of surveillance continued, hinting at an endless loop of observation and control. The Future's So Bright by Will Pfeiffer and Robert Valley, a commercial for a psychic hotline played, hosted by Joyce Carvel, a former 70s sitcom star. She excitedly promoted the Psychic Buddy Club, sharing a testimonial from a woman named Brittany who claimed she had found love after calling the service. The ad urged viewers to call immediately for a free first minute. In reality, the hotline operated out of a crowded call centre where employees, including Mary Klopp, used fake psychic personas. Mary, under the name Crystal, introduced herself to a caller, Sarah, who was concerned about her financial situation. While pretending to predict the future, Mary reflected on how she had ended up in this job, a high school dropout with limited options. Mary, however, had a real psychic ability. She could see the futures of others, but not her own. As she falsely reassured Sarah that she would soon be financially secure, she saw Sarah's actual fate, reduced to begging on the street. Mary recalled her own struggles and how this job barely paid the bills. When Sarah asked about her romantic future, Mary predicted that she would meet a special man soon. However, the image that crossed her mind was of a man beating Sarah. Ironically, Mary had no way of knowing her own love life. The company encouraged employees to keep customers happy, so they would continue calling back, but they were unaware of Mary's actual talent. As she took another call, she was startled to hear Victor on the line, a repeat caller who had been contacting her for months. First about love, then money, then health. Victor was obsessed with her. Mary had always painted a better future for Victor, but in reality, she knew he had lost everything: love, money, and health. Victor, sounding desperate, asked if he would ever make new friends. When Mary tried to focus on his future, she saw a terrifying vision, a brutal attack. She panicked, realizing she didn't want to know the answer, but it was too late. Victor pressed for details. She saw Victor's fate. He was being beaten violently by other men. In a moment of hesitation, she warned him to prepare for meeting more new people than he could handle. Victor took this as reassurance and thanked her, while Mary, shaken, quit her job. Outside, Mary told her boss Carl that she was leaving for good. He dismissed her, saying she would come crawling back since fast food and fake psychics were her only career options. As she walked away, someone called her name. It was Victor. He emerged from the shadows, revealing he had come to find her in person. He said he had called many times, needed her guidance, and thought she would help him. Mary, horrified, backed away as he pulled out a knife. He ranted about how he had thought the future was meant to be good, but it had always turned out bad, until now. Mary desperately tried to escape, but Victor lunged at her, ready to stab her. As he loomed over her, he declared that she had been wrong about his future, but now she would never be wrong again. However, before he could finish, police officers arrived and apprehended him. They began beating him with their batons. As Victor was beaten and dragged away, Mary watched, stunned. Even though she could see the future, it still managed to surprise her. Flinch Part 16, The Wedding Breakfast by Mike Carey and Craig Hamilton. Sir Charles Josper arrived at the Great Norton District Refuge, a charity institution for the poor, where he was the chief patron. Despite maintaining financial support, he had never shown personal interest in its operations until now. The administrator, Beecham, hesitantly received him, aware of Charles's dubious reputation. When Charles expressed interest in acquiring a servant, specifically an upstairs maid, Beecham Beecham found it strange, but complied. Another man, Selby, subtly criticised Charles's moral standing, questioning why he would suddenly take an interest in the refuge. As they walked through the institution, Beecham explained its structure: 4 dormitories, strict rules on cleanliness, and the requirement that inmates earn their keep through labour such as laundry and needlework. Charles feigned interest, but was focused on selecting someone. When he noticed a dark-haired girl, he pointed her out and demanded information. Beecham identified her as Mala, a 13-year-old girl of Romani descent. Her mother, a supposed prostitute, had died, leaving Mala in the refuge. Beecham dismissed Mala as an idler and a liar, someone who clung to fanciful stories about a father who would one day come for her in a grand carriage. Charles, however, showed no concern for her reputation. He approached Mala, speaking to her with an unsettling charm. He did not come for laundry service. He needed a servant at Alderley House. He offered her work at the estate, a bed of her own, and occasional care for his horses. Mala eagerly accepted, believing this was her chance to escape the refuge. Beecham, concerned about propriety, suggested formalities, but Charles dismissed them and left with Mala, promising to send a carriage for her in the morning. Later, as Charles rode back to Alderley House, he met his associates, Revel and Mowbray, and revealed his true intentions. He had been searching for 7 years for the perfect girl to complete the Braganza rite, a dark ritual involving a sacrificial wedding. The rite would grant him youth and vitality in exchange for Mala's life. He assured his accomplices that no one at the refuge would question her disappearance. Mala, oblivious, left the refuge with Charles and travelled to Alderley House. He presented her with a grand estate and declared that she was not to be a servant but his wife. Mala, naive and believing this was fate, accepted, seeing it as a vision come true. On their wedding night, Charles led her deep into the crypt beneath the manor where his accomplices waited. The air grew heavy as he instructed her to lie down on the stone. The men began chanting in Latin, preparing the sacrifice. Mowbray hesitated, questioning whether the ritual specified Mala's condition, implying she should be alive. Charles assured him that their infernal masters would not accept spoiled meat. As the ritual reached its peak, a demonic presence manifested, a towering horned entity named Balberith. Revel greeted the demon, asking if this was the promised wedding breakfast. Balberith confirmed and turned the feast upon them. In a violent massacre, he tore the men apart, spilling blood and devouring them. Charles, in horror, realised they had been deceived. Balberith stabbed Charles with his trident and tore out his heart. He served it to Mala and knelt before her. He said that he was very concerned as she could not track Mala. Mala, feasting on Charles's heart, met Balberith's gaze and smiled. With blood dripping from her mouth, she addressed him as her father, revealing that she had always known he would come for her and take her home. A Temporary Life by Charlie Boatner and Philip Bond. The story followed Michael, a temporary worker at the Quick Cash HMO document warehouse, where he struggled to keep up with his workload. His supervisor, Tina, pressured him to type faster, reminding him that while it was just a summer job for him, her career depended on efficiency. Michael admired Tina, feeling indebted to her for hiring him without an in-person interview, and resolved to do anything for her, seeking a way to improve his performance. Michael enrolled in an experimental study on metabolism. A bearded scientist injected him with an enzyme, explaining that it would take effect over time. That evening, Michael returned to his cluttered apartment, contemplating whether he could impress Tina by inviting her over. He started cleaning, only to realise that despite hours of effort, the clock still read 8:55 p.m. Time had seemingly frozen, leading him to suspect the experiment had accelerated his metabolism to an extreme level. Michael, now moving faster than the world around him, wandered through his still environment. Overwhelmed, he sought out Tina, hoping she could help. She eventually detected his presence as a blur, panicked, and struggled to comprehend what she was witnessing. Michael, desperate for communication, tried to stay still long enough for her to see him. When she finally registered his presence, she wrote a note asking who had done this to him. Realizing the experiment was the cause, Tina sought out Dr. Skinner, the scientist responsible. While she waited for his response, Michael, still trapped in his hyperspeed state, lingered in the office, struggling with isolation. But Tina kept kept him company, laying a quick kiss on his cheek. While he completed all of the office work, Michael left a note, urging him to write something about herself. Tina wrote that her life was boring. They communicated through notes, forming a tenuous connection despite the time disparity. While all these went on, Michael was aging rapidly. He had lost his hair and started turning grey and frail. Not much time had passed. Eventually, Tina contacted Dr. Skinner, using his unethical research as leverage to demand a position as the new director of the program. The doctor panicked, but she pressed him, making it clear she would report him to the FDA unless he cooperated. Michael, who was asleep at her feet, heard all these and woke up. He bit Tina's leg. Tina kicked the old, frail body of Michael. She accused him of staying in the box when he could travel the whole world. As Michael lay dying, Tina decided to escape, but as she swiped her card, the reader read, "Too quick." Realizing she had been affected with hyperspeed too, she desperately tried to flee, fearing she would not survive till Monday. Descent by Guy Gonzalez and Danijel Zezelj. A man navigated a grim, rain-soaked cityscape as he approached an adult entertainment venue called Hotspot Live Show. His demeanor suggested familiarity with the place, and he carried an air of unease. Inside, he exchanged a token for entry to the XXX live show. Right then, a naked man frantically ran out and collided with him. Then the naked man gathered himself up and ran into the rain. The man entered into a dimly lit peep show area where various performers engaged in sexual acts for an unseen audience. While he was heading out after finishing the show, the well-dressed man at the counter, with a sinister grin, signaled to him. He pointed at the man and gave him an opportunity for work. The man started cleaning the floor when suddenly one of the sex workers invited him into the peep show dais. People watched while they performed. A montage of vices followed: drug use, excess, and a descent into sexual fervor. The man was pulled into this world, but he became a part of it. As he sat on the peep show dais, the lady he performed with looked at the skull tattoo on his hand. Suddenly, he looked at the glass separating him from the audience, and what he saw shocked him. It was him on the other side, looking at him. He left the building and ran out naked in the rain, while the other version of him stayed inside watching. The cycle of the fall kept going on. Marvelous verdict, and that's the end of our descent into destruction. But don't think for a second that the horror is over. The Long Reads crew will be back when Vertigo Comics rises again in 2025. If Flinch returns, you can bet we'll be there, ready to dissect every chilling page. Until then, revel in the horrific glory of Vertigo's past, where the twisted, the terrifying, and the transgressive have always found a home. And remember, when the abyss looks back at you, don't flinch.